Good evening, Holliston, and welcome to the September 20th, 2021 Select Board meeting. We are going to get started with a introduction to a candidate for the Assistant Town Administrator / HR Director position. Kathleen Buckley is here with us this evening. She is our final candidate after 2 rounds of interviews. And I will ask Travis to bring her in and introduce her to the board, and we'll get started. My heart stopped for a minute, Kathleen, because I thought, did she leave the building?
No, I didn't know which way to go around the maze.
Buckley, how are you this evening?
I'm well, how are you?
I'm very good, thank you. Let me introduce myself again. We met during your second interview. I'm Tina Hines, Chair of the Select Board. John Cronin is Clerk of the Select Board, and Ben Sparrow is Vice Chair of the Select Board, and we know Travis through the interview process as well. So thank you for coming in. Thank you for agreeing to sit with us tonight. It's certainly a public event. We are all recorded here, but I hope very much to keep the conversation just between the 4 of us at the table. So if you're comfortable with the format, what I'd like to do is allow you a few minutes to introduce yourself, what drew you to this position here at Holliston, and then I'd like to entertain questions from the 3 of us on the board, if you're willing to do that.
Yes.
Okay. And before you go through your introduction, I think we'll just explain the process a little bit as to how it is that we are here tonight. So Travis Ahern posted the position for Assistant Town Administrator several months back now. And you are here tonight through the second round of interviews, and we're thrilled to have you here. We are looking for a position that is both the Assistant Town Administrator and HR Director. This is a new position for the town of Holliston, so there was a lot of due diligence, a lot of effort into getting you to the table here tonight, because again, it's a new position, so a lot of interest, a lot of excitement and anticipation. And so again, thank you for being here, and introduce yourself, please.
Thank you, Tina. Thank you all for having me tonight. My name is Kathleen Buckley. I was very interested in this position. It's a combination of HR and communications, which is my background, both in HR and communications. So I started in communications as Director of Marketing Communications for a staffing company, which is the place where I learned recruiting and staffing, and also building corporate culture. They were a best place to work, and we were one of 3 sponsors of the best place to work. That was very interesting to me. And I've been carrying that experience with me to try and build very healthy workplaces, great culture for employees. I did work at Easements for in communications as Assistant Director of Communications there for career services and for admissions, which is building a place where we're attracting both students but also businesses to hire our students. So it was a good fit. From there, I started at the Senate. I've worked for the Massachusetts State Senate HR department in the state legislature. That's where I built a foundation in HR, best practices, and in payroll and benefits. From there, I became the HR manager for the town of Wayland. I'm responsible for all of the HR in the town of Wayland, which is very similar in size and scope here. So this role was very interesting to me. It's a career advancement for me, which I'm very excited about. I've been in many leadership roles. I was an elected town meeting member for the town of Wayland. For the town of Needham. I'm very comfortable saying the town of Wayland, apparently. so public service has always been very important to me. Constituent services is very important to me, and employees are very important to me. So I think it's a pretty fit, and I'm very excited about being here as well.
Great, thank you very much. All right, so if you're comfortable, I'm going to turn it over for a few questions. And this, you know, I would say that this is a way for the community to get to know you a little bit better. You're a new face for us, but also a new face for the community. So this is an opportunity again for us to ask some questions that allow people to understand what you're bringing to the town of Holliston. So I'm going to turn first to the clerk and then to the vice chairman myself.
Thanks, Tina. Good evening, Kathleen. How are you?
Good, thank you.
Good. So I have just a few questions. They circle around more topics than direct questions, so narrative. What I'd like to do in these kind of instances is just give you a brief minute to answer, and I may be a little quick with turning over to the next question. There's a little pressure to see how you perform there. A little bit of stress, won't be too bad though. But I'm most interested in knowing, with all your HR experience, how do you get the best out of people?
You have to see what motivates them and what they get excited about and why they're here. Each role, especially in town government, they'll have separate passions and separate expertise. So if you can inspire them, give stretch projects, be a good listener, an active listener.
Have you ever run into an employee where that compatibility was not possible, where you couldn't reach them, where you couldn't find out how to get through to them?
Maybe on one or two occasions, that's always the way, but I never give up. I'm very persistent.
You talked about a good culture, or a culture where good things, generate in the workplace. What kind of characteristics are a good culture? And you could probably anticipate the same question.
I would say open communication, no blaming, no micromanaging. People feel like they can come here and be their authentic selves and work together to solve problems.
What's a bad culture? Have you been in a bad culture?
I think we've all been in bad culture.
Tell me about
So
your
we
bad
have-
culture. What
If
was
we worked in
malfunctioning?
high school and
Oh.
restaurants or.
High school. Go.
If people are micromanaging and if there are outbursts or throwing papers and slamming doors that can rise to a legal level. Kind of a bad culture, so. People are not going to share their ideas if they're feeling like they're going to have their comments.
Tell me about your leadership style. When you think of assistant town administrator, it's a significant position. As Tina indicated, it's first of its kind in our community. What can we expect in terms of your leadership style? Give me a few adjectives to describe what we can expect.
So I have an open door policy, which most people say, but I really feel that it's important that government is open to residents and they should be able to come in and say hello and ask questions. And I am in the town administrator's suite. My office is at the town of Wayland. We did not have an assistant town administrator for about 6 months. I was retired, so I was there working with constituents and working with residents. And as far as my management style, I'm also very trustworthy and I keep people's confidences, and I try to find solutions. And I think that's really important when you're focused in on operations and workflow.
When you think back through your career, do you think of anyone who made an impression on you, who was a mentor to you? And if you do, what kind of skills or traits does that individual have that resonate with you today?
There were several leaders at the State House that I did look up to, who were great listeners and found solutions. And I know that that's kind of the leadership that I'm most impressed with. And also at some of the professors at the law were also great leaders.
Financial skills. You spent your career in HR, you have a master's degree, clearly dominates a lot of your profile. I've certainly read a lot of the information Travis has sent along to us about your background. Can you tell us a little bit about your financial skills, specifically budget preparation, budget monitoring, any federal grant information? Just fill us in on any of that if you might have in terms of experience.
Sure. As an elected town meeting member, I'm very familiar with budgets, and our finance committee that works with the town meeting. We trust in them for their work. I'm familiar with capital projects versus operating. The way I contribute to funding the operating budget is I'm there to look at the FTEs, find out how much some of the provisions that we provide employees are a liability to the town. But there are also costs that keep them here. So I watch that. The contracts that I negotiate, I have to quantify everything that we do.
What's the most difficult decision you've made in your career? Think about that.
Part of what I do is compliance, and those issues that rise to the legal level. My job is to mitigate legal issues for the town, and so sometimes those decisions are the most difficult to make when I need to let someone go, or it just isn't working out because of certain behaviors. And I try to provide as much training and progressive discipline as I can before that happens. But there are times where I work with counsel and try to decide how best to handle those, and those for me are some of the hardest decisions.
When you think of your career arc, obviously coming in at Holliston expands a little bit about what you'll be up to, doing more than just HR. I think one of the things you should understand is maybe 3 or 4 years ago, the town was really interested in more of a CFO style position for this role. With Travis's background being strong in finance, now we swung back more to the HR side. It's definitely an area we need some assistance in. What other areas besides HR, perhaps fiscal, as we've just discussed, you see growing into here in Holliston, knowing our job description? What excites you about the role here that's looming?
I think it's important that towns are communicating with the residents, so that is certainly a piece that I think could be expanded. I think it would be, it's something that all towns are working on, is to better reach all the different communities, since residents use different methods of communication.
How
And
would
I
you-
also think
how would you do
diversity
that?
is one of those.
How would you do that?
Well, there are many different ways to do it. So
How would you,
some of
like,
it,
day one, what would you think would be one of the first things you would think of?
I will check all of your social media.
That'll take about 3 minutes. Maybe 2.
And then we come up with a calendar of an editorial calendar of exactly what the priorities are of the Board of Selectmen and the town meeting, and kind of what some of the big topics are, and then scheduling out exactly how you'd like to launch some of these communications, starting to build relationships with some of the press, local press, if you're interested in doing that.
Who does the town of Wayland public service or social media work? Does that fall under you or somebody else?
No, that is siloed right now in each department. So that's something that the town administrator is looking at to do. But the main communications comes out of the town administrator's office from one of the town administrator's staff.
And do you believe you have the skills to launch into that kind of space for us?
Yes.
Now, with respect to public outreach, what does that entail beyond social media? What else? What other ways would you reach out to residents and communicate priorities and information?
Depending on what they use, if the seniors are used to having a newsletter, the annual report is a great way as well. And certainly speaking engagements, community outreach, any of the community events that you do, there should be someone there representing the Board of Selectmen, but also someone there that's going to promote it and
Thanks, Kathy. Appreciate it.
thank you.
What's up?
Okay, thank you, John. Ben?
Hi, I'm Ben. It's great to have you here. Thank you for coming in and chatting with us. It's excellent to meet you. So I do have a couple questions. Touched on some topics with John that I was interested in, so I kind of quickly trying to shuffle some of my questions. John's very good at these questions, so he likes to steal my thunder, but he's good at it. Anyway, just a general question. I noticed you have a lot of great HR credentials, certifications and things like that. What draws you to HR? What about it do you like doing, and what made you decide to go into that line of work?
As I said, I enjoy working with employees, and I like to see people get inspired at work and then improving the organization and the workplace. And just having a great feeling of coming to work is important. And so that, and then to see how it grows an organization and impacts an organization is something that I enjoy. For government, our role is to kind of reduce expenses and streamline and improve workflow and try to save money. And so to have your employees engaged and sharing that goal with us it could definitely make an impact wherever you have good HR people there that are coming up with good ideas to keep and listening to the employees. It's also an interest to me, the compliance end of it and the law. I'm very interested in law, so employment law is also something that interests me, and writing contracts and teaching people about compliance and our responsibility to our employees and organizations. So.
Okay. Could you talk a little bit about employee evaluations? Have you done evaluations and in that regard? I didn't notice any of that. I'm just curious what your experience has been with evaluation.
There's a best practice around that, obviously, and that the questions have to be fair and honest, but direct and honest feedback makes you a better employee. I think everyone feels that way. When you like what you do, you want feedback to see if you're on the right track. I always try to put more negative feedback into goals, but I coach a lot of my managers on how to do this, and I sit in more difficult evaluations.
Okay.
But we always hope that people leave feeling more inspired and have a couple of things that they can improve right away so that they don't feel too discouraged. Does that answer your question?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's sort of I'm giving you a vague question anyway. So pivoting a little bit, with your experience in town meeting, in Needham, could you talk a little bit about what worked in communications, for example, from the town to you, and could you talk a little bit about if you start this position, how you would approach something like a town meeting, coming from that kind of perspective?
So Needham is significantly bigger, a bigger town than here. We have elected town meeting members with districts that we have. Everyone can come, so it feels like an open town meeting here, but only a few of us can vote. We start early because we want to get out and hear what everyone is thinking about, and we have different events that we all go to. One would be like the spelling bee in the spring, and there are different events that focus in on different issues in the town that we're having listening sessions so that we understand what we're voting on. So that's an exciting part of being part of the process of the town and making our own decisions, which I love town meeting for that. And I love the town government for that. So I think some of the communications is getting people excited about participating, and we made a conscious effort to bring everyone together on different issues. So there's only one pie and we all are sharing the same resources. So we had to be very considerate of what the seniors might want and what the schools might need. And so and I know I'm speaking to all of you, you already know all of this, but communicating that we're all neighbors, and our moderator does say every night that we're all neighbors and we start as neighbors first. And I think those kinds of communications about civility and professionalism also help in having these hard conversations to talk about resources and plans. So think we talked about tools with John and maybe more themes of communications I've seen success with.
Okay. Now, is Wayland an elected town meeting or is it,
No,
so
it's
there, it's open like ours?
open.
Okay, so there's, you know, thinking about that, how does, you know, how would it approach, you know, obviously, you know, when you have an elected official at elected town meeting, you know who to talk to, you know who to encourage to come to certain events and things like that. But when we have an open town meeting, how do we approach that? Like, what kinds of things should we do or could we do, like, to get more people involved and make sure the right constituencies are made aware of certain things? How would you, what do you think about that, and how would you approach that?
I think it's a combination of your community events and using the right tools, as John and I talked about, that social media, the Instagram for the younger people, and then newsletters and copies and lots of visits with the seniors. And there are lots of families that are out there on the fields right now that we can reach in different ways on the fields. So sometimes it's a little grassroots in towns, but it's having the right message and, you know, obviously being considerate of everyone.
Okay, and my last question is, so you've done HR at the state, you've done HR in the town. How can you characterize the difference between the two? Like, what kinds of things have you noticed as a difference between HR in each place?
People are people, so there seems to be a lot of the same challenges of just employees getting along, not getting along, needing some help. Differences, I would think, I had council on site with me at State House. I had Senate council, here I call council. I think that constituents and constituent services are a little bit more face-to-face at the State House as well. There are lots of people, it's our public building. And so there could be hundreds of people in the building at one time. And we definitely had a lot of people in need that would be in a line. And so my role is to support those people that are supporting our residents. So it's similar in a way, because here I feel like I'm supporting all the people that are doing good work, and especially during COVID, when I was supporting all of my first responders and my public health nurses, and you know, they were the ones that were out doing the good work for the residents. So it's a little different, but we're all here doing public service. Sometimes we get a bad rap for things, so I'm also there to, if one side loses their article on town meeting floor and there are some tears, the same thing happens in the Senate. So I'm there for all of that as well.
Okay, great. Well, I really appreciate you answering the questions and coming into. Thank you very much.
Well said, okay. So I want to come back to what you said in one of your answers to John or Ben's question about positive communication, civility, and professionalism. Those are traits that attributes that I very much respect. And so I would look forward to, I'm enjoying listening to you answer these questions, because I am learning more about you than I did, obviously, second time around in the first round of interviews. And so I appreciate the comments that you're making, and I would look forward to partnering with you on your efforts to improve positive communication, improve civility, and improve professionalism. I can't think of a single town that wouldn't benefit from that. It'd be a privilege to be able to partner with a staff member who was, well, they all are, but who through this role would have a very direct connection with the select board. So that was wonderful to hear. In terms of your work at BU, in Wayland, and at the State Senate, is there a project, an accomplishment, achievement that you're most proud of from any one of the three? Could you share that if you can think of one that stands out as something you're most proud of?
Sure. I worked on the NEPA which is the Massachusetts Equal Pay Act for the Senate. I worked with Senate Council to review about 350 job descriptions to see if there were any inequities in pay. And that's a law that went into effect about 3 years ago, and it is required that all organizations across the state take a look at their job descriptions and their jobs to see if we can make things a little bit more equitable. So I'm very proud of the work that we did there, and I would carry those skills forward wherever I go and keep an eye on that. So that would be one.
Okay,
View.
thank you. You mentioned also in your introduction that this job represented career advancement. You touched on it a little bit with one of John's questions, but I'd like to come back to that and just hear what you're hoping in terms of skills that you'll be learning or developing through this role that represent that type of career advancement that you're looking for.
Yes, I enjoy working with the town administrator on that level with the Board of Selectmen to do special projects, use my writing skills to attract grants and work on the annual report, but also on the town meeting warrant and proofing and working on the budget and finding out how we can save money here and there. And if staffing's involved, that's one thing, but even if it isn't, I'd be interested in taking on any project that the Board of Selectmen or the town administrator sees fit.
You may have.
Well, we can come up with some, yes.
And I want to end my comments questions with you talked earlier again to an answer to John's question about your open door policy. That's something you live out in your day-to-day job. I just want to share with you that one of the most consistent types of feedback that I get from residents about town hall staff is that that's exactly what they experience when they come in. They greatly appreciate, as they share with me, they greatly appreciate the friendliness, the openness, the willingness to help when they come through this center hall and they interact with members of different departments here in town hall. I receive that feedback fairly often. So I think that's a great fit, that's something that you also embrace. So I think we're all set with questions. I'll give you the last opportunity in this conversation. Travis, I don't know if you want to jump in with any comments, but Kathleen, if you want to end with any final statements or any questions for this board, is there anything you'd like to ask of us?
Sure. No, all of my questions have been answered. I appreciate your time tonight. I appreciate the whole process. I've met with the town a number of times. I had the opportunity to meet with the directors as well as the town administrator and the treasurer's office to talk about workflow. And it's been very professional and very informative for me. And I just really appreciate the whole process and everyone's time.
Okay. Well, thank you to the staff for your role in conducting the many interviews and performing the reference checks. We look forward to the significant, yeah, John.
I think for the public's benefit, and just to reiterate the cycle again that brought us to this point, there was a series of interviews, there was a posting, a series of interviews. Just briefly let the public know what brought us to this point with Kathleen, because a fair amount of work has gone on. So
Sure. So the chair started off, this was posted on the MMA municipal job website, which is really our best opportunity as municipalities to reach an audience. And the hiring committee held round one on August 23rd. At that point, the committee was very impressed with Kathleen. That committee is the same that we had got together previously, which is the superintendent, Susan Kuska, Dr. Kuska, police chief, Matt Stone, treasurer collector, Mary Busquette, who does a lot of the HR work currently, the IT director, Chris Mayo, town planner, Karen Sherman, and the recreation director, Mark Frank. With that, they did pass on two candidates that went to the second round of interviews held on September 1st. The grading was provided then to the full select board, and that was done again by Mary Busquette, myself, and the chair, Tina Hine. Reference checks were done by myself and background checks by the treasurer collector's office, as we have leading up to tonight, the 20th. I'd be happy to sort of give a general overview of the reference checks, but obviously probably goes without saying that they were glowing. I would say, I think professionalism was the word that came up previously. I think that is certainly something that we heard about Kathleen from people that she's worked with. And that, from a number of people in Wayland, that they would not have gotten through COVID-19 without Kathleen and the work that she provided in supporting all that staff. So I can answer any other questions, but that's what brings us to tonight. Thank you.
Okay, so we have on our agenda a motion and a vote on appointment. So unless John or Ben feel otherwise, I'm going to call for that motion.
I'd like to make a motion to appoint Ms. Kathleen Buckley of Needham, Mass. to be Holliston's first and next Assistant Town Administrator / HR Director.
We have a motion, do you have a second?
I will second that motion.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Kathleen, congratulations.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming in.
Is it, oh, by the way, is that subject to negotiation? Is that all cleaned up?
We will now move on to get a start date.
Subject to,
I will report back when we have a start date, so we're all aware.
congratulations.
Congratulations. Thank you.
Good luck.
Thank you so
Welcome aboard.
much. Thank you.
I did let Kathleen know that we have a full agenda this evening, so that we'll be in touch.
Thank you.
To hang out, because we might be here till 11 o'clock.
Absolutely.
I hope not.
Thank you, Kathleen. That's when I left last week. Thank you, Kathleen.
Good night.
All right, so we're going to move on the agenda. I'm just going to point out to John and Ben that we are working off of the agenda that is posted. I believe what you have is missing the, before the update from the town administrator, it should say community update on COVID-19. I don't think yours has that. Mine does not. It is posted though online. So it should be number 6 is COVID-19, as we've been doing every week. And then number 7 would be update. from the
Right.
administrator. That's what's posted. We're all good. I just want to point that out to John and Ben as we move through this. So
Thank
we're
you.
gonna hear the warrant for the evening, number 2.
So I have a warrant. I'd like to make a motion to approve $2,647,270.38.
Do we have a second?
I will second that motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
That carries. Okay, public comment, John?
A few items, please. Holliston celebrate Holliston unconventionally as a block party on Saturday. It was a tremendous event. Weather held out. The crowd was big, I thought, very substantial. It was a pleasure on behalf of the board giving out the proclamations early in the morning to the wonderful recipients of the Citizens of the Year, both Heather and Paul, well deserving. But I have to do a special call out. This one just resonated with me. And it's because, as somebody who's reached my stage in life, you start to see kids that you've seen years ago, all of a sudden appear before you. You don't recognize them. And then all of a sudden, Chloe Drugan just nailed the national anthem. It was unbelievable. I saw her probably about 10 years ago. She's a twin. She was just running around like a little girl, and now she's a senior at Holliston High School. She nailed it. It was quite impressive. What a way to start the day. So shout out to Chloe. She's got great things ahead of her. And her father said, yeah, she knows that song pretty well. A few things just on the DPW side, had a chance to catch up on DPW things with Sean. So for the benefit of the community and for my peers, just I'll hit them real quickly. Winter Street is wrapping up. They're 90% done, getting ready to hook up the main to Washington Street. They're going to be paving a trench, which is temporary, as we know. They're just going to lay that down and let it settle over winter. Back in the spring, and pave it to clean up Winter Street once and for all. The treatment plant is on schedule still for opening in summer of 2022. Travis, are you going to touch on the assistant DPW interview cycle in your updates? That probably would be better coming from you. Stan Tech, as you know, is coming before us, I think, next week. The Parks and Rec / DPW and Travis's people are actively working on the matrix, which I think you all know is the centerpiece of hopefully a revised reorganization of Parks and Recreation and overall maintenance of our fields this coming spring. So the work is being done now to identify which pieces go to parks, which pieces go to DPW, which pieces go to facility maintenance. That's going on right now. And I know last week when we looked at the capital items on the this fall's warrant, there's a brine truck, which we talked about last week, is a new tool, and Sean just wanted to alert that should it be approved, just don't be surprised if we don't see it right away. As everyone knows, there's a delay in the supply stream for anything that has 4 wheels on it. So I just want to let people know we're hoping for it right after, and if it is approved, but it could be delayed, so that's an outlier, but overall things are looking good. And finally, I got two pieces of feedback from residents of Munville because of the project that's going on down there. Sean's been on top of it as much as he can. He's the head of DPW, but anytime I call him with something, he calls the resident right back or emails them. He's been doing a good job, but a lot of things are going unexpectedly down there. I think they found some unidentified utility lines that make them stop work in one area, have to go to another, come back. Certainly is a rather old area of town that they have to rely on drawings and other things that might not be accurate. They're making their way through it and trying to work home to home to make sure the residents understand what's going on. But in any event you have any problems at all, Sean encourages you to call DPW, ask for him. He'll get back to you, to let you know what's going on. If not, pay you a visit and explain to you what's happening. We're doing our best to let the homeowners down there know what's to be expected and want to work with people to make sure they understand what's cooking. Travis, for your benefit, there's only been 2 updates on the website, one in July and one in early September. So if there's anything new, probably best to post something as soon as we get closer to the end of September. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Okay, Ben?
Just a couple quick things. I was also at Celebrate Holliston, but I went in the afternoon, and it was still a big, wonderful event. And I would share what Mr. Cronin said about how great of an event it was. And I'd like to give lots of credit to the Celebrate Holliston folks who organized that great event. And I think everybody I talked to who was there said it was, I hope we do it every year. They really enjoyed it. And I thought it was pretty fun, pretty cool thing to do. And then I went yesterday to the Historical Society's Harvest Fair. And that was good. I got my pie. So it was a good event. So, just also give credit to them for also hosting a great event on the heels of Celebrate Holliston. And there's lots of good things happening in Holliston these days, and it's exciting too. So that's all I got.
Someone said it was a towny weekend.
And it was indeed. It was indeed.
I have little to say except a huge thank you to our fire department. I don't know if everyone knows, they probably saw that there would be no in and out of the fire station, but it was every truck, correct, Chief Cassidy?
The primary trucks.
All primary trucks were moved off-site to the schools down on Woodland Street so that they were available to respond. And if I remember correctly, they were manned all day by a crew. So a huge ask for our fire department, and they stepped up to provide the services that the town may require in a case of an emergency fire or otherwise. And so thank you to the fire members who were on that day, as well as to the police. There was a huge police presence in the most positive way on either end of Central Street, and it was quite a big turnout. They had a lot of traffic that they had to manage as they shut down Central Street, and by all accounts, the day ran smoothly and without incident. So many thanks to our first responders who were out there to make this happen. That is all I have. So anybody on the call who has public comment for tonight? You're going to go ahead and raise your hand, *6 to unmute yourself. Okay, so I don't see any, so we are going to move on. Excuse me, we are about 10 minutes late for what was scheduled to be a Verizon poll hearing. John, you're going to open up that hearing?
Sure, so I'll make a motion to open the public hearing pursuant to Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 166, Section 22 for a poll hearing on Norfolk Street related to the petition from Verizon, New England, and NStar Electric. Motion.
I have a motion. Do we have a second?
I will second that motion.
Okay, so all in favor, aye?
Aye.
We're going to open the hearing now, and I believe we have a Verizon representative on the call, Ross Bilodeau.
Yes, good evening. How are you?
Being here, Ross.
Okay,
Ross, I'm sorry. Let me just recognize the clerk.
Shall I read the notice of the hearing?
Please do. We're going to just pause to hear the notice of the hearing.
In conformity with the requirements of Chapter 22 of Section 22 of Chapter 166 of the General Laws, you are hereby notified that a public hearing will be held by the Select Board in the Select Board's Meeting Room 105 at the Town Hall, 703 Washington Street on September 20th, 2021 at 7:30 p.m. upon the petition of Verizon New England Incorporated and NStar Electric for permission to locate pole wires, cables, and fixtures, including the necessary anchor guides and other such sustaining and protecting fixtures to be owned and used in common by the petitioners along and across the following public ways: Norfolk Street, place one jointly owned pole number T.3S/E.3S on the westerly side of Norfolk Street at a point approximately 89 feet southerly from the center line of Central Street. This notice has been posted on the town of Holliston's website for more information.
Thank you, John. Okay, Ross, I'm sorry, go ahead.
All right, sure. Couldn't have said it better myself. We're looking to place a new pole number 3S. This is a stub pole, which would be jointly placed with Eversource. The purpose for this pole is the pole across the street, which is the main pole line, is currently guyed to a tree to support, a corner in that pole line. My understanding that I haven't put eyes on it myself, but it's my understanding that the tree is either cut off or it's ready to fall over. So what this pole will be is for support for that pole line and replace the current situation we have with the tree.
Okay, all right. I have a question, but John or Ben, do either of you have questions?
I just have one.
Go ahead.
Hey Ross, good evening. Thanks for coming tonight. Can you help me identify which side of Norfolk Street this is? Is it on the sidewalk side or the non-sidewalk side?
Right where this part of Norfolk Street is it looks like there's a sidewalk on both sides. It's right at the end near the corner of with Central Street.
It's right at the corner. Okay. And will this impact any private property owner on that area?
No, the pole is, we're petitioning you guys, so it's gonna only impact the town right away.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, Ben?
My only question is when do you plan to do this work?
I understand that the current situation with guying of the tree is not doing so hot, so as soon as this gets approved, I would expect some movement, because I know that this could potentially be a problem if it's not resolved soon.
Okay. That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay. And Travis, butters would have been noticed by way of this posted hearing.
Yes, as the gentleman said, we're the ones who've been notified.
Right.
But, we did publish this.
Okay. And so you are looking for a motion? John, do you have that motion?
It would be as presented, which is the Norfolk Street one jointly owned pole and the number that John read earlier.
I'll make the motion to approve the petitioner's request to place one jointly owned pole number T.3S/E.3S on the westerly side of Norfolk Street at a point approximately 89 feet southerly from the center line of Central Street.
Do the motion, do we have a second?
I will second that motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, Ross.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Have a good night.
Thank you.
I'd like to make a motion to close the hearing associated with the utility pole.
I will second that motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
So the hearing is closed. And we are just on time for our next public hearing. So John will get it right this time. I'll get it right this time. We will call to open it. You can read the notice of the hearing, please. So
I'm gonna
7:40.
Make a motion to open the public hearing pursuant to Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 82, Section 17 through 32 for road acceptance requests related to Highlands at Holliston subdivision, specifically Mohawk Path, Mayflower Landing, and Indian Circle.
I will second that motion.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. The hearing is open. So is it Karen or Travis who's going to present? Oh, goodness. John, please read the hearing.
Shall I read the hearing?
Yes, I think that'd be a good idea. Yeah.
Select Board notice of hearing. Notice is hereby given that the Select Board of Town of Holliston will hold a public hearing at 7:45 on Monday, September 20th, 2021. In the Select Board's meeting room, room 105 at the Holliston Town Hall, 703 Washington Street, Holliston, Mass. For the purpose of considering the proposed acceptance of Mohawk Path STA Station 39 to end Mayflower Landing and Indian Circle as prepared by Guerriere and Halnon Incorporated, Milford, Mass, dated January 20th, 2020, with revisions through August 26, 2021. Town Hall has limited public access. Please join the Select Board's meeting on the Zoom link. This notice has been posted to the town's website as well.
Thank you, John. And 3 months in, I'll get it right the next time. Okay. So I'm gonna hand this off either to Karen or to Travis. I'm not sure which one of you would like to.
Sure, so I'll
Those
just,
are the
I'll hit the
details.
highlights and then, I believe we have Karen, so we have Karen Sherman with us, as the town planner. We also have Representative Pfeffer, which is Angela Conforti. We have Jim Sullivan from Burrier and Helmont. And I believe we have some residents as well who are interested, in this topic. So what we're doing here tonight would be to advance, if the select board is in favor, to advance this to the warrant for road acceptance on our October 18th, fall town meeting warrant. As you mentioned, the town planner Karen Sherman, so she has provided to you a memorandum of where we are with this project. It is 3 streets, as the clerk read. One of the streets is partial, in that the other part of it had already been accepted, and the other 2 are in their entirety. Some of the background information was provided by the town planner. We could obviously get into if there are questions from the select board. And if there are questions, they can be directed as well to the representatives. Karen, is there anything that you want to specifically lead off with that I did not mention?
I think just to clarify, so the select board has to, as another part of chapter 82, has to file its recommendation with the town clerk 7 days prior to town meeting. So, I mean, logistically, you want to sort of do this and get a lay of the land before you advance the warrant, but you also have to, within 7 days, to make a recommendation to the town clerk under the other provision of the general law. So you're juggling multiple general laws at the same time in your responsibility as highway folks.
And so referencing the highway folks that Karen mentioned, Karen has been out there herself to review these roads with the highway superintendent, Tom Smith. I believe that there was somewhat of a list put together, and we can discuss that obviously as well. And that there was a few other items that we discussed previously as it relates to the subdivision, but other than that, I believe Karen provided to you what that list is. And would it be possible at this point then to have to address where we are with that list, Karen, or have you already received that information?
I haven't, Tom and I went out this morning. We didn't see any evidence that any of the checklist items had, that there had been work on any of them. I think that Mr. Sullivan probably has a schedule or a tentative schedule of when things might get addressed. And I think from a policy perspective, it would be up to your board whether you wanted to sort of force their hand prior to town meeting or within those 120 days after town meeting to sort of get it right, as well as get all the paperwork filed.
You referenced 120 days after town meeting. Can you just elaborate a little bit on that?
Sure, chapter 82, the same sections, that's section 17 through 32, requires that all deeds and easements be filed 120 days after town meeting action.
Okay. So I hear you suggest, well, I see the item list, Karen. There appear to be 19 items
Okay,
from your walkthrough, from your site walk on September 15th.
yeah, and some of them are very generic and are applicable to all 3 roads.
Okay. And I know we have residents on the call who may have comments. I'd like to give an opportunity to Mr. Sullivan to speak to the request made by the town of Holliston, where the project stands, and offer comment on the road acceptance that's before us tonight. So Mr. Sullivan, if you'd like to go ahead.
Very good, thank you. I believe Angela sent over a schedule from the list. Schedule is updated probably just today. I think it came over, but 2 of the key things was maintenance in the basin areas and maintenance of the catch basins, which we had been holding off till till we had an understanding that things were moving forward towards town meeting. As far as the list goes, most of the items are scheduled to be done by 10/8. A couple items earlier than that, and some of the sealing of the roads, the cracks and sealing of the roads, we're gonna be a little later than 10/8. 10/12 was the latest on the schedule that was put together. So again, we took the punch list, talked to the client, talked to Pfeffer Construction, and they put together their schedule on trying to meet the items. And the mowing of the basins and the cutting of the invasive species was kind of first on the list to be done, 22nd, 24th. So later this week was their target point to get the basins cleaned. And then there was the numerous other items on here. Generally speaking, most of it, final punch list items as we would describe it from the site walk. And I'm confident through Angela that the client will be able to get these done for us and be in a position for the roads to be accepted this fall.
Okay, so of the 19 items, you're saying the majority will be completed by October 8th. Some will be October 12th. That puts us within that window of 7 days before town meeting. But do you see any difficulty in having them completed within the 128 days, 120 days after town meeting, which is October 18th?
Again, 120 days after town meeting is when?
The point at which all deeds and easements need to be filed.
No, I don't think so. Everything's been presented to Karen, deeds, road acceptance plans, et cetera. So I don't believe so. 120 days from your town meeting. No, I don't think that would be a problem. The only one item that I'm aware of is a lot of difficulty right now getting curbing, granite curbing, which is part of the subdivision. I think there's one piece that's cracked, and other than that, no, I don't see any material items or things like that that could prevent completion. Excuse me.
February 14th.
Is 120 days. February 14th. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. Karen, could you speak to the opinion or recommendation of the planning board? They've obviously deliberated on the request for a road acceptance. I don't have their opinion in front of me, or I'm not seeing it. Do you share their comments and opinion for the board?
Sure. So this was last discussed on the 2nd of September. I did a very similar memo that I did to you in terms of sort of the process. This roadway network within the subdivision, certainly I don't think Holliston has seen a roadway network within a single subdivision this big since the early 1960s. So it's very complicated. It's certainly not following the typical 2-year process as outlined in the subdivision control law. It has been 20 plus years, and it has been done in phases and fits and starts, and you name it, it's been done, it's been redone. In terms of the way that the project was bonded and constructed and inspected, it was conventional. Many of the improvements have been in place for many years, including the paving. The latest drainage adjustments that I had seen based on our walkthroughs with Highway Department were in the fall of 2019. There are some similar drainage structure adjustments that are being requested now. Things like drain manhole lowerings, when a plow can hit the corner of the manhole structure. There are several of those. Those are not major items. So as far as the process, Attorney Conforti had submitted sort of a release of the performance agreements to the planning board earlier in the summer. And the board allowed those performance agreements to zero down for these particular roads. So there are roads that are connected to these that are within this subdivision still. and connect to Fafford's other active subdivision, and those roads are not coming before you because they're used through the construction. Namely, Road A, which is part of Old Cart Path. So if you're coming through the other subdivision down the big hill, and Governor Prince. And that street is split between the two subdivisions and is traveled and shares some infrastructure with it between the two subdivisions. I think that's sort of it in a nutshell. You know, we walked through multiple times on this project. And I don't think we've gotten any feedback from other departments other than Conservation Commission. So last winter, the final touches were put on the conservation restriction that's required in this subdivision. It is a cluster subdivision, so there is protected open space. It is in the hands of the homeowners association, and has, you guys would have signed off on that in partnership with the Commonwealth. So it's a three-way partnership on a permanently protected open space restriction. And all of the lots have been constructed and signed off on by the building department.
Sorry, can I just ask one other thing? And if I missed it, I apologize, but on the street light installation, because you mentioned the previous bonds, there was discussion on a maintenance bond, which would then fall under the purview of the select board. If the street lighting goes in, if anything were to happen to the road, then the town would have something to lean back on. Did I miss that?
I think what Jim's staff had done was to prepare using the planning board's generic construction cost estimate form, which is based on mass highway cost projections. Sort of two scenarios is that one for Mayflower Landing, where the light conduit and bases have not been installed. So there are planned 5 underground and 5 overhead fixtures. On the south side of Mayflower, Jim? I believe it's the south side. And so there are things like street trees there now that probably will be damaged or could be damaged, as well as the green strip inside the curbing. And so there's been a sort of a linear footage and a per fixture estimate done on those. And then for the other light bases on Mohawk, Indian Circle, 17 on Mohawk, 6 on Indian Circle, the conduit and the bases for those have been installed. And so the bonding being proposed is for any little oopses around those structures in case there's a problem with the installation of the poles themselves. So your board would be asked to hold 2 performance bonds or maintenance bonds, if you want to call them that, for the utility installation.
And if I may, the bulk of that work is to be done by Eversource, installing the lights and installing the wire. That's the last step on all the roads except Mayflower Landing. The bases and so forth are in. The utility, I've been dealing with them for, I'll just say a long time, trying to get the lights going on that site. And just as early as either Friday or today, there was discussion about getting the poles dropped off to have the work starting to begin for the lighting. So the intent of the bond would be, as Karen described, the utility is going to put the lights up. If there's a conduit that might be damaged or something like that, Fafford would repair that, but you'd have a surety bond if for some reason that wasn't getting done.
Okay, thank you. Guys, could you just walk through the process? This is a process question. from road acceptance to the issuing of maintenance bonds, the two maintenance bonds. Town council would need to review those. Those will come back to the board, but can you just sequence that out in terms of where we go from today to town meeting with the road acceptance and those two maintenance bonds?
Sure, so the maintenance bonds coming in this conversation are a little out of the ordinary, right? Generally speaking, Karen Sherman as the town planner and the planning board are overseeing all those bonds, right? Since we're discussing essentially the idea that, you know, hypothetically, the town is signing off that the roadway can be accepted, that the punch list is gonna be, but then that we know that further work is gonna be done. This is essentially, you know, sort of protecting the town's interests in that work. So that's the sort of unusual component here. As Karen mentioned previously, the normal course of action here is for you to allow this to appear on the warrant, for you to direct myself or for you to file with the town clerk the approval of the plans, which are referenced in the hearing that the clerk read earlier. And then the third component here of the maintenance bonds is really the unusual component that I thought Karen did a good job explaining. So.
Okay, so if the board decides to make a motion and vote to advance the road acceptance, it would be contingent upon, to be on the warrant for fall town meeting, it would be contingent upon these two maintenance bonds? Or we would move to town meeting and then afterwards the board would come back to discuss these two maintenance bonds?
Sorry, Karen looks like she's.
I'm sorry, I think what's also been offered is sort of an agreement to govern the construction. So I'm not sure. I think that when Travis and I had spoken with Jay Tallerman about this earlier, was that your vote should be contingent upon all of those things.
All of those things, including the punch list.
Yes,
Yes,
exactly.
got it. Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think what we will do is hear from residents and then John, then ask questions after. Would you like to start with questions now?
Let's get our questions on the
Okay,
way first, as
sure.
we may preempt some of the citizens'
Okay,
interest.
yep. Please do.
I have two main questions. The first, if all goes according to plan, Jim, and you get the vote you need, and town meeting comes and it goes, and you get that vote, when do you think most of this work will be completed? And I understand, I'm reading your signals about Eversource or Enstar, whichever one it was. I know we're beholden to the utility, but the rest of the items, just to confirm, they'll be completed within 120 days following our town meeting?
Yes, we would anticipate most of it being done before that, but absolutely.
Okay, Karen, I'll ask you this question, although maybe this is a new question, but groups of residents approached this board probably 3 years ago, very, very upset with Fafford about the condition of the roads and the non-acceptance of the roads. They were baffled on where to go for answers. I'm very grateful that this day has come because I think many of them have been more than patient with the construction company to get this before us. Should it prevail, when can buses access that space to begin picking up children in that neighborhood, given the fact that the school year is underway? Have you had any conversations with the schools? I know it's an unfair question because you're planning board, but I don't see anybody from the schools on. I'm just trying to understand what people can expect in terms of services up there, Karen.
It's not really an unfair question. Keith Boudet and I usually have this discussion in August when they're planning their routes about whether things are on the warrant. So I'm sure that he will sort of try to adjust routes when he can. I know there is the winter bus stop situation is a little different, so I'm not sure when that goes into place, but certainly something that they can be planning for. They do ask the question every year. They do go through the town meeting cycle and ask.
So Travis, if I could pivot to you, if we could have an answer from the schools prepared for town meeting. I think it's a question that many of the residents up there would like answered if this roadway would be accepted.
Absolutely.
And then finally, Karen, you mentioned that the rest of the development or the other part of the development up in Fafford is not in play here. This is only for the 3 roads that are mentioned, correct?
Yes.
Is there any movement feel free, Angela or Jim, to weigh in. Is there any movement to get those streets accepted? How far away are they?
They
Yes.
are at least fall of 22 at the earliest. There is some base course pavement that is going to be reinstalled this fall, and the rest of it evaluated, and then the top course of pavement would be in 22. My guess would be the earliest would be May 2023, having overwintered the top.
That's all. Thank you very much.
Ben, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I have two quick questions here. The first one is I know Tom Smith was at the walkthrough, but has the DPW weighed in that they're comfortable with accepting the roads provisionally on the punch list being completed? Is that a fair assessment? I'm not sure you answer that.
Karen,
I'm sorry, is that question to me?
Well, is Tom, I guess it was because Tom was with you. Was Tom comfortable with this accepting the road?
I don't think that he believes that there are, I don't want to speak for him, but I don't believe he thinks that there are any issues that would speak to the integrity of the roads.
Okay.
He himself inspected the top course of pavement and much of this curbing install, so I think he's comfortable with most of it. Devil's in the details, so we'll see how this cleanup goes, but in general, things look pretty good.
and I'll just add to that, which kind of pivots off of Mr. Cronin's question, which is the snow and ice component moving into this winter. So obviously Tom being involved is important. I did have a brief discussion with Sean Reese about it. You know, this is, as Karen mentioned off the top, this is a significant amount of roadway. And so, you know, there have been discussions on what would change in terms of the path to incorporate this coming winter. It's not insignificant by any means, but that is part of the conversation.
Okay. And my second question is the lights that are being added for Eversource. Do we know what kind of lights they're putting in?
They
I
are,
believe, good, Karen.
go ahead, Jim, it's all you.
I think they were either 50 or 70 watt sodium vapor lights.
Oh, we like LEDs.
I was hoping for LEDs.
Make them LED.
Yeah, so I don't remember if I had talked to Travis or somebody initially when we filled forms out. The town had to send in the forms, so the requests were made together, if you would, and I think at the time they weren't doing LEDs, if they are doing them, we could certainly find out about it, but I don't think they were at the time, but that's what I recall.
I know they're doing them now, so I throw that change order in.
If there's any way, yeah, they can do LEDs. I prefer them doing LEDs.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Those are my two questions. Almost.
Okay, thank you. So I think where we are, before we get into resident comments, if there are any, is we have the planning board recommending to the select board to consider this road acceptance. We've had meetings somewhat with some residents, and I believe residents are anxious to see their roads accepted, to John's point about getting school buses in there for their children and many other reasons. So I appreciate that Jim Sullivan and Angela Conforti are well aware of the desire to have these roads working for the residents the way they want them to. So with that said, I'll open it up. And are there residents or any callers who would like to ask a question or make a comment? If you do, just raise your hand or *6 to unmute. And I'll recognize them in the order that they come up. Okay, so Mr. Bean, AKA Gareth Brannigan, if you unmute yourself, you're up.
Hello, everyone. Hi, Dina. I had one question. The plans that are on file with the town clerk at the moment don't have or specifically mention the easements to the drainage systems that we have been talking about in recent times. So I just wanted to ask about that and how we're going to handle that.
So again, you're asking that your question is plans currently don't identify the drainage easements?
Correct. There's the 3 drainage easements that we've been having conversations about. They're not on the current plans. And so when the town goes to approve, I just want to make sure that they're approving the plans that have the easements as we've been working towards.
Karen, could you address that?
Sure. So I think I noted that in my memo, but there are 3 easements on individual lots that sort of on the upper side of Mohawk Path that deal with some of the drainage from the open space above, from the steep slopes, and some yard drain issues. So, there are numerous individual drains on a lot of these lots. These 3 in particular are new. They've been added on the fly. They're not exactly conventional, but they seem to be functioning. So there's no objection to them being added. And I think the plan would be to have Guerriere and Hanlon put one more revision date on the plans. And I believe they're all on it's only 2 sheets to revise on Mohawk.
Okay.
Yep.
Is that reasonable, Jim?
Yes, that's what we had spoken about. That's correct. The plans, Gareth is right. The plans that we filed a little while back will need to be updated with those 3 easements. Yep.
Gareth, could you just again give your name and address, please, for the record?
Gareth Brannigan, 143 Mohawk Path.
Does that answer your question? Are you satisfied?
It does. It does. And I'd also like to just recognize the long journey here, and many of us in the neighborhood are very excited as we move forward. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you for your patience and for all those involved in getting us to this point. It is good news. Well said?
Yes, thank you.
Any other comments or questions? So raise your hand or *6 to unmute if you're on a cell phone. Okay. I do not see any hands raised, so I think we're going to move forward then to entertain a motion to advance the road acceptance for the 3 roads in question, which are.
I just had one.
Yes, of
component.
course.
This was from the Rail Trail Committee, which was looking for some direction on parking at the bottom of, Mayflower Landing. We'd had previous conversations. I just want to make sure that we all have an understanding of what we're going to do there. Essentially what the rail trail is looking for as you get to the base of Mayflower is to be able to put at least a couple sort of perpendicular, parallel parking spots as the rail trail crosses there. And I think, again, just as we're discussing some of the things that are going to be completed here, I think that's one component that they anticipated we would address.
So not widening the road at all, just marking out the existing pavement?
I believe that was what was discussed before I came to town.
Karen's shaking her head.
No.
I believe they're resetting the curb and recessing for the spaces. Would be the preference. The Rail Trail Committee has also explored sort of doing a parking lot off of the roadway as well.
Are we looking to have Jim acknowledge that?
I don't know if there's any update for this group or not.
Okay, yeah, if either Jim or Angela, if either of you could provide an update on that request. Are you aware of it? Are there plans to address it?
Yes, there are plans. And we had drafted a sketch. Let's see, Howard Fafford passed away back in January, and before he passed away, he asked G&H to draw up a plan. And I believe there is some land owned by the town of Holliston along Mohawk Path. And so he had put, I think it was 5 or 6 parking spaces in or on some of that town land off of Mayflower.
Okay.
So that's definitely something that we can send plans to the Trails Committee and to the town and discuss that as we move along.
That would be appreciated. Thank you, Angela.
You're welcome.
I did see a hand go up briefly from Mark Freeman. I don't know. Mark, is that hand still?
The neighborhood would strongly support putting some parking places there. But we would prefer if you widen the road because it does get kind of narrow with people parking outside the road. It already is a very narrow road.
Mark, could you just give your name and address?
Sure, it's Mark Freeman at 7 Indian Circle.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's all. I just wanted to make
Yeah.
sure we address that. For
No,
them.
I'm glad you brought that up. I don't see any other hands raised. So I think what we'll do is consider a motion. John, do you have anything written? Are you prepared to make that motion or would you like me to?
I don't have anything written, so I'll take a stab at making the motion, Travis, if I could. I'll make a motion to approve the road acceptance Mohawk partial Mayflower Landing Indian Circle and the successful completion of the items as listed on the memorandum to the board. Ms. Karen Sherman, pursuant to the bond holding work that was described within this hearing this evening.
The motion, do I have a second?
Yeah, I will second that motion.
Is that, one second, is that a complete motion? Did I capture everything in there?
The only thing, and Karen, I would ask you is that the select board can also direct me, quite frankly, to make sure that the town clerk has everything that they need to move forward. Everything's filed within 7 days prior to town meeting. Is that the only thing that you would identify as not in that motion?
Yes.
We can do a separate motion for that, yeah.
So you
I'll amend the motion to include the direction of the town administrator to work with the town clerk to secure any other information relative to this action.
Second the amendment.
All in favor?
Aye. Make a motion to close the public hearings associated with the.
We
roads.
amended the main motion, we're gonna vote on the main motion.
So we just approved the motion, the
The amendment.
amendment, now we have to come back and approve the full motion. So I'll entertain a motion completed with the amendment as approved, as read earlier by John Cronin.
I think it's already out.
All
So I
right,
think we just have to approve.
okay, you want a second? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Got it.
All right.
Thank you.
Make the
Thank you very
motion
much.
to close the public hearing associated with the road acceptance of Mohawk Path partial Mayflower Landing Indian Circle.
I'll second that motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, Angela. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
for being here.
Thanks. Thank you, everyone.
Good night. Good night. All right, we're gonna move on to the agenda to item number 6, which is COVID-19 community update, for which we will invite Chief Cassidy up to the table.
Evening.
Hello.
Good evening, Chief.
Nothing for the clerk to read, so I can speak. I can just start.
You can start.
Couple requests for the board this evening from a cares perspective. First one is a follow-up to a discussion we started last week at the meeting. Earlier this evening, the Youth Advisory Board did vote to officially request of the select board $25,000 for another round of rent and mortgage relief to be administered by the Community Action Fund. And so that was a pending item. We weren't sure what number that was going to be, and they did indicate that if there is a large outpouring of requests that quickly uses up all that 25,000, they will be happy to come back to us and ask for additional. But the number for this evening from Youth and Public Services is 25,000, and then I do have 4 other quick requests as well. First one is from me as the Emergency Management Director for a variable message signboard. I know this has been something that the clerk had been very eager for us to discuss throughout the life of the pandemic. I had been hesitant early on because the feedback that we got from our colleagues at FEMA was that they were not receptive to FEMA reimbursement for variable message signboards. They felt that it was more cost effective to rent rather than to buy. But since our purpose right now is to try to spend down the CARES balance through the 29th of October, if our intention is to purchase this under the signage and communication component of CARES and not trying to seek federal reimbursement, then I think this is a great way for us to chip away at that balance. That would be 100% CARES is what I'm proposing.
Quick question about that.
Yes.
Where would that live?
So because that would be an emergency management, that would likely live somewhere at one of my 5 stations. So the expectation is for this to be consistent with a CARES expenditure, that it would be available for obviously emergency communications, also public health communications, so things like flu clinic. So that's not conflicting with the new variable message signboard the police department purchased, which is letting people know about restrictions on roadways, or it's not conflicting with schools are open, use caution. So this would be one that would definitely be available for emergency communications. Also, it would be available for utilization or deployment by the assistant town administrator in her communications role. But that would be my my proposal with it. It would be very similar to the one that the police got based on funding that was authorized last December. Second request would be facilities for $1,980 for additional dehumidifiers. So last week the board had approved a dehumidifier for the town hall, and facilities has since requested a dehumidifier for the police department as well as for the golf course. So we want to make sure that we're keeping our facilities not having accumulation of mold, but also want to have a healthy breathing environment for employees and or personnel who are working in town buildings. Also a request for $7,000 that was voted by the Parks and Recreation for a combination of 8 air purifiers, as well as some touchless faucets. And then lastly, a request from the technology director for a PA system for the senior center. We've previously talked about the tents that they got through a grant, and the board was kind enough to vote a CARES appropriation to assist with the setting up of those tents. The intent of these tents is to allow them to do more activities and functions outdoors. The problem is, given their clientele, they need amplification of people who are speaking. And this is a little bit more expensive than a normal PA system because there's no power in the location where the tents are. Therefore, the technology director has spec'd a PA system that has a battery backup capability so that it could last and function for a couple hours on battery. So all total, between those 5 requests, the variable message signboard, the dehumidifiers, the purifiers, touchless faucets, PA system, and rent mortgage relief, $49,230.
Looking for your spreadsheet that has the current balance. I have it here.
So the spreadsheet that I had sent earlier this morning was looking at upwards of not to exceed 50,000 for rent mortgage relief.
Right.
And so at that point, it was 41,208 for balance, including projecting these expenses, I believe. So we're looking at 66,208 currently projected through the end of October.
With the approval of these items.
With the approval of these items, that's correct.
John, do you have any questions? Brendan?
Nope.
How many variable message signboards does the town of Holliston have now? This is great. I don't mean that in any other way except to just clarify.
Sure, we currently have 3 that are true variable message signboards that aren't dedicated with a speed counter or a speed tracker to be able to tell you what your speed is. So the ones where you can truly change multiple lines of text to be able to alert folks. And those are spread right now between DPW as well as the police department.
The message that you had on the little graphic you had there was road flooded.
Yes.
In all seriousness, we've obviously had roads flooded this summer.
Yes.
Have we used any of the message signboards? Has that created? It just seems like this is a perfect use for the fire department. You guys are among the first to respond when there is a flooded road.
Sure. So the signboards that were deployed to the 1900 block of Washington Street for the flooding with one of the rounds of 8 inches of rain this summer, those were Mass DOT signboards because they were on the state highway. Yes. So to date, we have not deployed variable message signboards recently for flooding because most of the signboards were being used to communicate changes to HCVEs on certain roadways and school opening. But, we welcome the opportunity to add to the communications to our residents because people come in from different directions. And one of the things that we identified with the water crises back in the mid 2000s is that folks said, hey, it's great that you set up that board in front of town hall, but I live on Adams Street. I'm oriented towards Milford. I come in from the Milford side. I leave through the Milford side. I don't come downtown. I never saw that board, message board with the notice about a water issue on the west side of town. So knowing that we have more capability, it will certainly enhance our ability to target messaging to either neighborhoods or obviously the whole community.
Okay. And as a point of clarification, also, you had said the dehumidifier was for the golf course.
Yes.
That would be hard. I imagine you meant the golf club.
Yes, so
We're not putting it out in the middle of the.
correct. That would be for the garage where the golf carts are stored.
Yeah.
We had an issue there with a fire alarm device last week, and just waiting the 15 minutes for the facilities manager to meet me there. I was uncomfortable inside the garage, even with the door open. It was just not a healthy breathing environment.
Okay. All right, so we have 5 requests totaling $49,231 for CARES Act money, leaving us with a remaining balance of roughly $66,000. So there are no other questions or comments. I'll entertain a motion to approve 5 requests for CARES Act funding for $49,230.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
That carries.
Thank you. And just one note to something that the board had mentioned earlier when they were talking about how successful Celebrate Holliston was. I don't want to take all of the credit for us relocating our primary apparatus. I could not have done that without the partnership and the hosting of the Holliston Public Schools. We asked permission ahead of time. What we were doing was we were looking for a location that was separate from the locus of the Celebrate Holliston, so that if any of our emergency responders needed to respond to where the apparatus was staged and park their vehicles, there's going to be sufficient parking, but also out of the way of the street festival. And as usual, the assistant superintendent for finance and operations was extremely gracious and even offered to let me unlock the building so that any of the personnel that were standing by there for hours, if they needed to use the facilities, could do so.
You know, to be honest, it kind of owes you for the parades.
We don't keep records.
Oh, okay. No, of course, this was a great collaboration on all fronts and certainly with the schools. So yes, very much appreciated that they offered up their facilities for parking lot for
We
that.
keep records, we don't keep score. Keep good records.
That is true.
I just will never forget you directing Airstream the day of the first parade. I thought that is above and beyond what most reasonable people could do on a day like that. So.
It's things that we can add to our resume.
Or epitaph, as it may be.
Okay, and then just quickly in terms of our COVID case count, as of today, we're up to 900 in total cases since March of 2020. We added 8 new cases today, but we took 15 off of our active list, so we're down to 12 active again. Last Thursday, when the Department of Public Health issued their weekly report, we were back in the yellow category after having been in the green for a week. And I do anticipate that as we continue to monitor, that we'll probably continue to bounce back and forth between yellow and green for quite a few more weeks.
Could you just update this board on when the Board of Health plans to meet again? I seem to recall, correct me if I'm wrong, that they were putting the mask mandate in for municipal buildings for 2 weeks and would then revisit it. Did I misunderstand that? Is that what the plan is?
They had put their indoor mask order for municipal buildings effective through October 1st.
Okay.
So they were in parallel with the DESI guidance
Okay.
for schools, and they would continue to monitor not only our local numbers, but also what was happening with the school populations and the DESI requirements, as well as the MyHep requirements for interscholastic athletic activities.
Right. Okay. Sorry. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Any questions? Okay,
The rent mortgage vote was at 7 o'clock tonight.
Yes.
So,
Yes, yeah, they didn't vote to see that.
no, I just did. Thank you.
thank you for coordinating that.
Absolutely.
Okay, so,
I'll be back later. But I'm gonna discuss logistics.
yes, that's right. So we'll take the update from the town administrator.
A few things.
I'm taking tomorrow off.
Trying to think of which ones don't fall into number 8 here. So was mentioned earlier, the deputy DPW director hiring process. We tried to intentionally start that earlier than necessary to make sure we got somebody in for the new snow and ice season while we still have access to the retiring highway superintendent. We had a number of internal candidates, the external candidates pool that was selected. We had a late dropout, so there was only one that was interviewed. So what we've done is the internal applicants, which met the minimum requirements and were excellent candidates, have been granted a second interview, and we'll move on with that process. And we also made sure to make sure that posting, so that the town has access to view our internal candidates against a wider pool, was republished on the MMA website that we mentioned previously. So we are progressing with that hiring, excellent internal candidates, and making sure that we are getting a full view of everything out there as well. So progressing, and I'll continue to update the board. One other thing I wanted to mention, so these two are, so the Viewpoint program that we discussed under ARPA, to do a 6 to 7 minute corporate profile of Holliston, including a 1-minute educational segment that we broadcast on a variety of different areas. The crew is coming to town in mid-October, trying to get them in before all the leaves are off the trees, get some scenic views of Holliston, do some interviews on the finer points in the storyboard for that. So we are anticipating them to be on the ground in early mid-October. Two things that sort of pivot into the next agenda item. One is that the governance committee will not be putting forward anything on the October warrant. At the same point, what they are looking for as well for them moving forward is the DLS tab report, which we are obviously waiting for as well. So I discussed with the chair of the governance committee that when we have that report, we all have time to dissect it, we would put them on a future select board agenda to discuss that report, and then also where they are. And lastly, something that again will come up in a moment under the fall town meeting preparation is that we will have Stan Tech with you next week on September 27th. They've already presented to you an initial draft of the sidewalk prioritization plan, which was authorized at December 2020 special town meeting. The other report that was authorized at that town meeting was a water modernization study. We will receive preliminary draft report of that in front of you next week. Hopefully I'll get it earlier than that for us to review, but they will be with you at your meeting next Monday night on the 27th.
Travis, before you move on, can we just circle back around to the governance committee?
Absolutely.
I had a conversation with the chair today. He's requesting the opportunity to present to town meeting in October. He would like a minute or two at the beginning to provide an update. As you mentioned, they don't anticipate, they're not planning on an article. And he is asking that the board consider granting that request to provide an update at town meeting. We don't need to make a decision tonight, but.
Okay, I will follow up on that.
Thank you.
And that's all I have under this. Everything else will be discussed under number 8.
Okay, any questions for the town administrator?
Not at this time.
All right, we're gonna move on then to fall town meeting preparation. And I believe Chief Gaston, you're back up too, because the first thing here is a logistics discussion.
Thank you for having me. So the great thing is, it will look
We've done this before.
very different from July of 2000, July of 2020, December of 2020, and May 2021. There are currently no distancing requirements. There are no a lot of the mitigation steps that were required for places of assembly previously will not be in place. Right now, there is a requirement for approved face coverings for everyone going into school buildings. Although currently DESI's mask order is extending till October 1st. The Holliston Public Schools, the school committee voted a mask order which runs currently and does not have a sunshine date to it. So there may still be a mask requirement for anyone attending town meeting based on the fact that the Holliston Public Schools will be hosting us. I did check with the Assistant Superintendent for Finance and Operations, and he assured me that although they are not currently open to outside groups or organizations renting a facility, that would not apply to us, that we still would be able to come in and hold our fall town meeting in the auditorium. And again, we won't need the stanchions for lining people up. We won't need the directional arrows. We won't need to block off individual seats in the auditorium. Folks can sit where they feel comfortable. So if you want to sit with your friend with your mask on, you're welcome to do so. If you want to stay a little bit farther away because you don't know what their vaccination status is, or you just want to stay away from them, you're welcome to sit an entire row or section away from them. So we will not need overflow seating. We won't need a secondary setup in the cafeteria or in the gymnasium. Everything will be able to be contained within the Holliston High School auditorium.
One big happy family.
Exactly.
There is no state of emergency, but the past 3 we had a state of emergency.
That is correct.
And the face coverings, if required, which it sounds like it likely will be because we're following the Holliston Public School policy.
Correct. Our host regulations, just like right now, there are several businesses in town that, although there is no order from the Board of Health that covers those facilities, as the municipal buildings are covered by the Board of Health's order, local businesses have mask requirements of their own. They can do that. So the schools have indicated that anyone coming in, whether they're an employee, whether they're a visitor or student, will be wearing masks. So my expectation is that people should be prepared to wear face coverings when they come to town. And we probably will be able to come up with the appropriate language for the warrant before it gets published, just to baseline that they will need to comply with all requirements that are enforced on the date of the town meeting.
I think most of us, when we're out in the community, we're seeing you go into a place of business and you often will see a sign that says for this business you're required. I mean, I think we're sort of at this point used to seeing those signs as we enter into the building.
We did have a couple people, even during the state of emergency back in both December as well as in May, who were not as eager to comply with the regulations that were enforced at the time, and caused some conflict for some folks who were trying to enforce. But we try to educate and cajole, do our best to baseline and make sure that everyone feels safe.
One question that I've received a couple of times was whether or not we were looking at the quorum, and I would say at this point, no, and because of the emergency order, I don't even think that it will be a valid option for us.
Yeah, I would not see, based on our metrics, where we are in terms of active cases right now, I could not see that under the statute a compelling argument could be made that it would be necessary to reduce the quorum for a public health emergency. It would not be consistent with what we're seeing in our numbers and all of our other messaging with regards to the fact that we continue to be trending very well.
The only question I have is, Chief, is will we be going through the decontamination efforts after the meeting?
Yes.
To return the space back to a clean environment?
Yes. And we will also make the hand sanitizer available at the check-in tables. The schools continue to have the hand sanitizer pump dispensing stations at the entrances. But yes, they will do the fogging, the ionization after we leave. Thank you.
I'm all set. We've done this a few times, so I think I have faith in you and you know what you're doing. So we're gonna
rinse, repeat.
Hopefully just a slightly bit easier job for you this time around.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
All right, so on the agenda, we're going to move now to a review of the warrant articles received today by 4 p.m. Travis, do you want to kick off the conversation?
Sure. I'm just gonna pull up on the screen the list. There's still some information that I'm gathering for us all to discuss, but at this point, these are the articles that we're planning. First 4 we've gone through, and the first 3, quite frankly, to finalize, we will need the free cash certification number, which we get from DLS. For those that have asked in the past, last year, actually, in the decade of data that I was able to pull from the state's website, last year was the earliest we've had free cash certified. And then we ended up postponing our town meeting, but we got them to certify it on September 25th. Then we postponed the October meeting until December, but I would anticipate that we will at least meet that date this year. So, within the next week, we'll have that free cash number and then be able to put together a reasonable plan of approach to the stabilization fund, the pension stabilization fund, the capital expenditure fund in terms of funding those. Obviously, the select board and the finance committee have both had discussions related to the financial policies, and that those come into those conversations as well. In the capital budget, actually, I'll pull up the more detailed list here, which includes the numbers. I'm happy to get into any of these, although I know we did have a brief discussion previously. The one I highlighted here in red is the new addition. I spoke with James Keast, and I've put on his shoulders quite a bit recently as we get prepared for the conversation we let off tonight with, which is a new ATA HR director. But really that's one change that we've gone through in the last few cycles. We've repurposed 2 positions, no increase in headcount, but we've identified HR as a need for us moving forward. The ATA HR director and the HR benefits specialist, which is a position created at the December 2020 special town meeting, again repurposed from another position. Now represent our 2 HR staff in town hall, and as such, we are planning to create an HR space downstairs in town hall. We're also finishing, which we showed at a previous meeting, a space upstairs, which was formerly the sewer office, which should take the functionality of the conference area downstairs, allow us to schedule meetings there through the clerk's office when boards and committees need space, allow us to use that space, most likely have this technology up there so people can be doing hybrid meetings out of that room. Again, replacing the functionality of what we use the downstairs conference room for. But to turn that into 2 office spaces for 2 individuals, the ATA HR director and the HR benefits specialist, will take some funding. And while the facilities manager has for the first time a budget in their current fiscal year FY22, we did discuss that these are essentially one-time costs to get that office established. And the way that I have it here is FF&E, which is fixings, furnishings, and equipment. There is some ability for us to cannibalize in other offices, filing cabinets and those types of things. But in terms of desk spaces and those, this would allow us to essentially set up that office. So exciting, but also I've asked the facilities manager to do quite a bit, and I think this is a reasonable request to put on there. And so this is really the only significant change that you've seen since the last time you heard from the schools, and there was some information requested on sort of a backup quote on the 500,000, but what I have here is what they presented to you. And additionally, the only other one that has sort of got a little bit more conversation, the rest of them have all been presented either through me to you or through department heads to the capital subcommittee. The only one that's had a lot of discussion has been the public safety cameras on traffic signals. And this is one that is a joint request between both of our chiefs. And the discussion that we had, the select board and myself at a previous meeting, was that we would prefer it if it's going to be on the warrant to be in this article rather than a separate article. And that the request that was made by the capital subcommittee was that a policy be in place for them to review before they make a recommendation. Which I believe we should be able to have a discussion on relatively soon. So this is the Article 4 on this list. Obviously here it doesn't have the numbers, which is why I pulled up the other one. So unless there's any questions on that, I'll keep going.
Just real quick, I'm ping-ponging between the 2 spaces. The new ATA and HR benefit specialist will be upstairs or downstairs?
So downstairs, so
Downstairs, but that
the
space-
downstairs space is used relatively frequently in terms of being
Pinecrest
able to, right, and so we are
Okay.
using it with one of these boards here to do sort of hybrid meetings, so that space would replace the functionality of downstairs. It is also ADA compliant in that our ADA access point to this building is in the front of the building. You come up the ramp, now you're on the elevator, you're going to the elevator, you're in that conference space, so it is more accessible to the public than the
Oh, I
downstairs
see, sure.
conference room in terms of ADA compliance. So I think it does work for that, and then it does allow us essentially to have two HR professionals who are able to close their door at the current moment. Our HR benefits specialist, every time they want to have a closed door meeting, will come into this office, or have to go downstairs. So we are looking to increase the ability for HR to be a functional department in town.
And then in terms of the public safety cameras, that is no longer an ARPA request. We're taking that off. And putting it here.
The direction from the ARPA steering group and then the conversation that we had last week was that it is, it's better suited here.
Thank you.
That doesn't mean that it can't go back to an ARPA request if you would like to remove it here, but that's the conversation we've had to do.
Understood. Thank you.
Sorry, was it?
John, yes.
I just have a general question regarding the capital plan. Sitting here and it just occurred to me over the several years I've been on the board, I see capital improvements at our various public buildings, which is great. I think that's long overdue and much needed. I thought of the fire station, the library, council on aging, this building, even the golf clubhouse. But I don't recall a lot of public funds in the capital budget being assigned to the fire stations. Multiple locations. I wonder, do we have capital funds allocated for any of our fire stations? Not equipment, I'm talking about buildings for the next several years in the capital plan.
Yes, so we did do $50,000 in May, and that is part of a 5-year capital request from the facilities manager who's reviewed this, who's reviewed those facilities. So let me just pull up what information I'm referring to. So if you go to our website, under town links, the facilities, the finance policies and info, we published for the first time a 5-year capital improvement plan. This is the initial one, and we all understand that there's going to be significant changes and improvements as we go, but it's important to have. So if you scroll down, there's a lot of information on the capital work that we have done to date. There's some information on our policies. There's some information on the capital that we have done over the years through grants. If anybody's interested in sort of the work that we do outside of simply what we accomplish at town meetings. This is the last two FY20 and 21 capital spending by town meeting in different categories. And then you get into there's some.
It was up, you went by terms. Keep going, this one, top, fire.
So this is actually just the debt schedule. So there was at one point that has matured, was in FY20, was fire. So if you go down through these charts, which show the debt that we just discussed in more of a visual format, you come to the 5-year, and so there's obviously a table of contents at the top. But so under facilities, these are through the facilities manager in different categories, and included in this under fire is a central fire rehabilitation and replace heating system at the CG fire station, HVAC as well. And so James Keast requested $50,000 in May and plans on requesting $150,000 and then $100,000 based on the backup data, which is included at the end of the document. He put together a 5-year request for those items. So we can certainly, at any of these, I think it would behoove us to have a conversation, make sure that, the select board agrees with some of the assumptions that I've built in here, working with the department heads and those types of things. But to answer your question, it is factored in here through James Keast, and we can certainly always be addressing, if we feel like that's enough, and working with the fire chief as well.
Great answer. Thank you very much. Second question, Tina and Travis, through you, Tina. We talked about the $500,000 for the schools last week, and I believe we placed a contingency on this. You're going to continue to hold that until we get more information. Is that correct?
Yes, I believe we asked for
We're going to revote
what
that.
the $500,000 entails.
And we'll revote that once we get that information.
Sure.
Because, okay.
So the chair of the school budget subcommittee presented to the capital subcommittee at the finance committee. On that request, we heard directly from Keith Bidet as well, and you asked them for that information, which I plan to get from you and bring back to you.
John, your point being that the number could go up or down.
No, I think it's going down.
Sure.
Keith made it clear that $500,000 was on the upper end. We would spend it all and give back to the town, but I'd like to have a little bit more understanding about. I think we asked the facility manager to be consulted about what they plan to do with these rooftop units, because it didn't make sense to me to be putting new rooftop units on a roof that's 20 years old. Shouldn't we be looking at putting a roof on there first? And so, with all due respect to Keith, who's pretty good at what he does, I think he's our resource to understand the sequence and the smarts of doing something like that is worth a second guess. That's the whole point to me.
Sure, the revote then is for the number. not-
Clarification, what's the plan?
It's not to keep it here or remove it, it's what's the number. Got it.
You got it.
All right, Travis, I actually have a question. It's completely off topic in terms of the warrant, so if you just entertain it for 30 seconds here. One of the comments I often hear is we do studies and then we never do anything with the studies. We have the Stantec sidewalk study. It's not finalized, the board has not accepted it yet. When that happens, that data, that information about how much we should be investing per year, that goes into this capital. So I'm not surprised to not see the number that I saw in the draft report here because it hasn't been accepted yet, but that is the way that it would move. That the information on repairs and such would go from the report into this capital improvement plan.
Right, so this was printed based on the understanding that study was, and actually
Yeah, this is a
there's
June
there's a
1 date.
memo included in the 5-year CIP that references, I think, some of the studies were directed by the select board. Some of the studies were from other departments, but we knew that they were coming, so I just listed everything that we were sort of waiting on. And then there's a placeholder of, I think, $450,000 per year in sidewalks in the 5-year capital plan, referencing again the fact that that information may change once the report is established. I would on any 5-year capital, and I think, I've discussed this with a number of people, but generally speaking, I would update this annually, right? And so it'd be a rolling 5-year, you'd go from FY 23 through 26 to next year, FY 23 through 27. Because we do capital in May and October, I think we have the ability most likely to have sort of the 5-year published in time for May with a revision in time for October, although again, this is sort of the first year we're rolling out.
Okay. I know it's a 58-page document, but boy, it would be great to provide this at town meeting. I'm not asking for that.
I think the
understand
link at the very least in the warrant.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is what residents are.
Town
looking
paid for it.
Well, that and looking to see how it is that we're taking these studies and
Turning it into
incorporating
action
that, into action items that we're planning for, so.
I just, one thing to John's point about the rooftop units, I do think we need more clarification. I think you're right about that. But I think what I heard from at the capital subcommittee meeting too was that they're looking for an amount that would replace the largest unit. Now we need more specifics on what that exactly would be, but it would be greater than a reserve fund transfer. So it would be, the idea is to have the money set aside in case that largest unit fails, I think is the idea. And so that way because if we had to use reserve fund transfer, it was too big for reserve fund transfer, therefore it could wait too long to be replaced. I think that was the idea. I think that's the general idea of having that number.
But with that conversation, I'm not sure, in my memory, I'm not sure Keith knew the exact price of
He
that
didn't,
biggest
he didn't,
unit.
but I think the idea was to try to make sure that if it fails, I think it was it's the one over the auditorium. If it fails, then it could be something that you would be able to use it for potentially months, and I think that was the idea of trying to get out of it. But that doesn't preclude the fact that there should be some more clarification.
Is it hand raised as well?
Ben was at that meeting as well.
There's a hand raised if you'd like to take that. Or
Yes,
we can
are
keep
you-
going.
Well, so do you have more to your town administrator report? No,
I'm
where are we?
under-
Oh,
I'm
sorry,
under
I thought
qualified
you've been
and then
talking
review
so
of
much, I
warrant
thought we were
articles,
still
so,
under town administrator.
I was
okay.
on the capital, which I
Uh,
believe is what Ben is looking to address.
Okay,
And
then
then I
as
can
the chair of this capital subcommittee, we'll give him the opportunity. Ben, go ahead.
Muted.
Yes, so I want to reiterate what Ben said was exactly how we heard We were hesitant because it's to approve the 500. We still haven't officially approved, but we heard that $500,000 was kind of a hold, basically there in case the roof unit has to get replaced in the middle of the year. We were hesitant to do it, but we understand the concern. They don't want to really do a lot of replacements. They're still holding out hope. We're going to get money from the state. And so they don't want to do a lot of capital repairs. However, they're concerned that if the rooftop unit goes, they're going to be without it for, whenever. So that was the reasoning. I don't know if there's actually a price because it could change. It can, if this thing doesn't be replaced in 5 years, prices could go up. They could go down. So I thoroughly agree with John. We should probably get more information, but I just want to say what we've heard, and we weren't opposed to it. We just think there should be some sort of plan in place so that we're not just holding the money out there. We understand where they're coming from and they want to be conservative and not replace it now if they don't have to replace it. So that was
Okay.
the general gist.
Sounds like everyone's saying the same thing in essence. John, go ahead.
Hey, Ben, how are you? Quick question. You
Good.
just mentioned that the advisory committee was wondering if money would come from the state. What did you mean by that?
I'm saying for the state, for the replacement of the whole entire building. And they're still holding out hope for getting that approved. That's why they really don't want to do a lot of capital repairs or anything like that. They'll only do it if they have to. That was the gist we were getting from both Lisa and when we spoke to Brad and the superintendent. Not Brad, Keith. So.
Okay.
My recollection from that meeting as well, and hearing Lisa's sort of view of it was, we have a balance in the CapEx fund in terms of this was a request, and the $500,000, was put into the Collins Center based on a quote that was received. And that, essentially, if you look at it as the CapEx balance, and this is sort of something that we understand in terms of HVAC is going to be spent on the schools, we're encumbering those funds against the balance of the capital expenditure fund. Not all of these things we treat apples to apples, but I think with that understanding, I certainly understand that if the money was not spent, a town meeting at a later date can turn that back. But okay, so I think everybody's of the understanding that we will be getting more information on that, so I will follow up. Any other questions on the capital? I'll pull back up. So this is the list as of 4 p.m. today of where we are. As I mentioned before, the governance committee does not have an article. That was probably one significant change from the last one. I do need to talk to Frank Chairman on the Community Preservation Fund. We generally have an article, and at this point, they have not voted any approval for spending. Article 5, the fund transfer to affect the tax rate is essentially the longstanding one that, as far back as I've looked, has not been action has not been taken upon. The fund legal support for cable license renewal is a discussion that we have with Barry Sims. The Verizon is now complete, and on next is the Comcast. The good part about Comcast is that we're going to be discussing a 10-year agreement, which makes it, sort of less repetitive, and yet we will be planning a larger amount. I've provided what I have as a quote, because it will most likely be a little bit longer of a negotiation. The fire EMS organizational evaluation, I have a quote as well. This is something that came out of the FY22 budget discussion. And this is, sort of a best practice, looking at where we are in terms of our service model for fire EMS, and seeing if there's any improvements that we want to make. A firm would benchmark us against other towns who use our service model, others who do not. And make recommendations, which is essentially what we'd be receiving, which we could consider as early as the FY23 budget process. Lastly, and I'm grouping these in a way, I think, if you're prepared to move them, advance them. Sorry, go ahead.
Can I just ask a question on the fire EMS organizational evaluation? I had spoken to Chief Cassidy a month or two ago about looking at the BLS model that we have for shared services with other communities. Will this particular review look at the cost of that program, the fees we pay as a result? Okay, so
It's going to need to look at all of
So it's capturing those peripheral issues as well, the mutual aid and all that.
There's gonna be a lot of those. I think, just very, very high level. I think you gotta look at status quo, the level you're providing and the cost that it has. You gotta look at other options such as regionalization, privatization. You have to look at all those types of things, put them all together. If we want to increase service, what are the potential costs associated with that? Is there another way to be providing the same level of service, those types of things? I don't think anything's off the table, and I think that, there's a couple firms who do this. It's a pretty small pool, but they all, they quite frankly, they've used Holliston to benchmark our service model in other studies. So I believe we're going to get a lot of good information.
If that item is approved at town meeting, how long is that deliverable out there before we see results? Would there be something available for the spring, or is that too optimistic?
So the problem with the idea of sort of budget packets going out in the December timeframe is, we certainly will not have this back by then.
Sure.
Could it impact the FY23 budget? Yes. I don't have a date from them in that all I've received to date is a quote. So I don't have a contract that I can hold somebody's feet to the fire on, so to speak, on a date, but we can certainly work with that if this is approved on how quickly the turnaround we'd be looking for.
I think it would be helpful for town meeting to have something in your pocket. So if there's any way you can ask them generally how long it would take to conduct the review for a town our size, it would be helpful in case somebody asks us town meeting.
Again, these firms use us, so I'm hoping that, we can keep a pretty aggressive schedule.
Thanks.
The Phipps Tunnel restoration is a request that came from discussions with the rail trail committee, the trail committee representatives. Obviously, everybody's very familiar with the Herculean efforts that they have made and maintain that. I would say that the Phipps Tunnel, in terms of a list and things that would, impact our capital, 5-year capital plan as a town that are sort of outside the purview of what could be accomplished through that volunteer effort. The Phipps Tunnel restoration is going to be one of the ones that we'll be discussing. This is a request for geotechnical evaluation that would lead to a future request. Now, that future request, if it's going to be to restore the tunnel, what we're looking for really is what the scope and scale of that would be through this evaluation. That restoration may be appropriate to approach the CPC in the future on. But this, I believe, is probably most appropriate as a separate warrant article to kick off that process, make it clear that what we're looking for is information to determine scale and scope. And we do have a quote on that as well.
So is this particular article going to look at the structure of the Phipps Tunnel to see if it's structurally sound? Is that what it's about?
There would be some boring information that they're looking to collect. Look like you had a response there.
My understanding, John, is it's much more the culverts alongside and the retention
drainage.
walls. That's,
Part of it.
yeah, that is my
They're
understanding.
very concerned about continued deterioration.
You
of the
can
drain.
see it up there this
Yeah.
summer with if you're on the rail trail often enough.
Well, for sure, there's been drainage issues. That's well known. However, recent observations is a section of the Phipps Tunnel, kind of visualize 4 legs that hold up the tunnel. One area is quite disturbed. I don't
Yes.
know how old it is and whether or not it's structurally
That
impacting.
is the intent of this.
Thank you. All right, thank you.
And so with that, as I'm looking at this in terms of, helping get other groups moving towards a pretty tight turnaround time here on the warrant. Obviously we wanted to give the public as long as possible to have an open warrant to be able to put anything on here or request access to the warrant. So we'll have this meeting next week on the 27th. We'll hear from Stantec. We'll have the ability to refine the warrant. I would say the meeting after that, the first one in October, is when I'll be probably presenting you with what is a final product or very close there too. And so, if there were some articles to be sending to the finance committee now for review to help them move along with their evaluation process, number 7, 8, and 9 here, I believe the numbers are tight and can be reviewed by them. I'd be happy to review them at their meetings. And so if the select board is comfortable with 7, 8, and 9, I would look to do that. Article 10, 9 Green Street construction phase, I do now have a quote from PAR Engineering, who is progressing with the demolition plan that we discussed. They presented that to you. what I'd be looking for here as I continue to work on alternate funding sources is support to have 9 Green Street, the construction phase here from PAR on this warrant. I would follow a similar methodology that we've done in the past, which is to say, we're looking for this appropriation. We will continue to look for an alternate funding source, namely grants and state funding. And if those come to fruition, these funds would be turned back to the town. And that gives the ability of town meeting to review what has been put together by PAR, which is really 3 sketches that do have some differences that could be discussed, but really from a cost perspective to the town are very similar. Those would be sketches A, B, and C that were presented to the select board at a previous meeting by PAR, right? I would put that in the warrant for review. So everybody can sort of discuss it. The town meeting could take that up. We could make it very clear that we are still looking for other funding sources, but we would carve out the funding here with the intent to turn it back if we got those other funding sources. So that's one that sort of I'm still looking for consensus from this board on. I don't believe there's any further information that we need from PAR, but more just action from this board to move forward. Thank you. Judge, you keep going?
Yes, please.
Okay. Water system improvements. As I mentioned, we will have Stantec with us on the 27th to review this report. I'll remind the audience, because obviously you're all aware, the conversation that we left with the Stantec group, which is a separate group of engineers, the one that presented a draft report of the sidewalk. One of the things that they were tasked with when they left that meeting was make sure you are working with the Stantec group that is doing the water study and looking for synergy there for when that is presented. So I would anticipate that when we hear from them on the 27th, that we will be finalizing that conversation with them. With that, I think, one of the conversations that the board had last week was looking big picture, potential borrowing on a variety of water system improvements that come out of this study. I don't believe that we'll be on an October timeframe to have that conversation, but I believe that what we will find from Stantec when they sit down with you next week is some low-hanging fruit that they're saying, these are the improvements that should be made in this water system. And I think that those will most likely address dead ends. And that's what I have here on the article for you to consider next week when we sit down with Stantec. If at that time you disagree, we can always open the warrant to remove it, but that would be my recommendation.
John.
Thank you, Travis. I think we have to look at that, as you described it, as sort of a phased approach, because there's a lot going on within these infrastructure studies, and we're finding that out. Certainly, we're going to get to the ADA issues associated with Article 12, but on the water system improvement piece, just to reiterate a little bit what I was saying last week, I believe with the possibility of substantial additional federal relief coming for infrastructure improvements, it behooves us to sort of wait to ask for any town support or town funding for such improvements until we can evaluate exactly how much Holliston might be looking at. Unfortunately, that time frame may take many months. It may not be ready by the spring. It may be ready by this time next year. We have a very active legislative delegation that wants to work with us. I spoke to Senator Spilker about this very topic this past weekend, past conversations with Rep. Dykeman. They want to work with us to help get additional state federal resources to help us with our infrastructure. So I think once we see that particular report, being able to pulse which ones are phase 1, like you said, the low hanging fruit, that I think we can achieve for the October town meeting. But looking ahead, the bigger picture, the larger phases, I think we'll be serving the citizens of Holliston better if we evaluate other alternative funding needs. In addition, one item I just want to breathe a little bit of life in. It's something Travis and I were texting about over the weekend, and for my peers, Ben and Tina's benefit, we still have some ARPA money left. We have not committed. We're going to try to pull back a little bit, but there's one particular item that I'd like to put onto the table for some further discussion down the road. And this came up about 2 years ago with Mark Aronian, and more recently, Dan Alfred and I were exchanging some emails about it. And that is to look at the possibility of bringing a sewer pipe from the high school down to the water treatment plant. Now, it's been talked about. We're obviously very active in our thinking about ways to make that treatment plant a little bit more efficient because it's terribly underutilized. But using ARPA money for that is home run because it can pay dividends for many, many years to come. There are a lot of challenges with that kind of a project. It's a big project. It would be disrupting, obviously, roadway that we just paid to pave. But I think over the next 3 years, which is the lifespan of ARPA, if we think collectively about the benefits and keep our eye on the progress that that kind of a project can give us, I think we'll all find that it's very worthwhile to explore and hopefully to initiate. Making use of the federal money for that purpose will have a lot of benefits to the downtown business areas. And I know we're about to get a report in early October that will help us towards that. So just food for thought. I'm not trying to enter an argument or a discussion tonight, but I call it a little bit of a big project here. But I do think, and ever since Mark brought it up a couple of years ago, conceptually, it kind of makes sense. So thinking ahead down the road, in addition to the article Travis was just talking about, our infrastructure issues are obviously something that means a lot to this board. And I don't think we can lose sight of that particular opportunity. Thank you.
Yeah, and I would just to sort of tie that together, and you mentioned it through the LRRP process, which is now due October 8th. Our original consultant, Nelson Nygaard, got to engage with a number of subject matter experts. Beta is the group that they were assigned through the state's process. So all of this is engineering services being provided to the town at no current cost to us. And that subject matter expert will be providing sort of what they see as potential options to maximize the use of that. At that point, right, if the town likes what comes out of the recommendations from the LRP, which again, we're within 2 weeks of most likely having that, that then ARPA could be used in terms of design engineering, and then we could be looking at some substantial costs associated with it, but also potential funding sources through the state. So it's not something that is on this warrant, but it's certainly something that if not for the LRRP process, providing a subject matter expert to us through that grant opportunity, that we potentially would have on this one.
And just as an aside, I know some folks are aware that the community's been actively trying to think of a new high school. Not many people envision a new high school anywhere other than Hollis Street. So if we were to engage in a project against a building right now that may be replaced with a new one, we're pointing the pipe in the right direction conceptually. So back to that point.
And so the water system, again, next week we'll have Stantec with us. They can clear up a couple of the conversations that we had in terms of sidewalk. We want to make sure that any sidewalk project or projects that we look at are not stopping us from or not working in conjunction with a water main project that we may do, right? We want to make sure that we have synergy between the two of those. At the same point, one of the things that we did receive feedback on from Stantec in terms of the sidewalk improvements is maintaining the assets that we currently have, right? Not necessarily looking to add, although I believe that we should have some recommendations from them on that as well in terms of additional connectivity, but they really did hit home quite a bit, maintaining our current infrastructure, addressing ADA compliance when it comes to ramps and some sidewalk. So this would be the area that I look at in this cycle of October with the Stantec report, which again, we can sort of circle up next week when we have the other group back as they were working together. So I have separated here, and I guess what I'd be looking for tonight from the select board is an understanding. The sidewalk improvements from what I took from the Stantec report would be, do we want to get from them the first step in addressing those ADA compliance issues, and then also address some of the crosswalk safety issues which were highlighted in Stantec, but also the complete streets, which are separate from our request for funding through the complete streets process, or do we want to combine 12 and 13? I currently have them separate for discussion purposes, but I'd be looking for some direction from the board.
Travis, on Article 12, what I want to point out is when you say ADA compliance, the point that I think is really important to make is that you're talking about sidewalks that are existing that are not compliant.
Yes.
So this is not new sidewalks that we are going to build to ADA compliance. This is existing sidewalks that are currently non-compliant with ADA. And for those that don't know what the ADA is, I'm sure we all do, but it's the American Disability Act. So these are sidewalks that anybody with a disability is going to have significant trouble negotiating. So existing sidewalks that are not compliant with ADA pose a safety risk as well as the effect of limiting access for those with disabilities. So I like keeping it separate. I think we're talking about two different types of projects. And so it makes sense in my mind to have 13 and 12 or 12 and 13 separated.
And I would agree with that. I think the separating is important in this case. And I think the intention potentially long-term would be 12 would be something that we would be seeing, the kind of thing we'd be seeing consistently, and the crosswalk, and the 13 might be something that's a little bit more of a one-time kind of a thing. I mean, not to say that we would do it in the
No, I
future,
understand what
just to say like the 12 would be something that we would be looking at probably having in future ones.
Well, I think as John's explained it, it merges in with the Stantec water main.
I also believe that I was sharing my screen that whole time, so. This year, for the adoring audience, we were talking about Article 12 and 13 and how they relate. And then obviously the water system, number 11, all of these.
Our numbers did drop off when the town administrator started talking. Did you notice that?
Every week, every week. There's a little 8 in that pops
It's a
up.
drone of my voice.
Your wife has it on it for the kids to go to sleep too.
We'll hire a consultant to get our numbers up.
We'll sub in Catherine.
See, here we are, we're
Sounds
after
good.
9 and we're starting to fall apart. We're gonna zone back in, finish this
Okay, so
strong.
I will keep those separate and I will mark those down to be discussed next week and finalized after our Stantec discussion. The stormwater management, MS4 year 4, yep. We have now seen obviously 3 iterations of this. This is not a new request for town meeting. I discussed with the consultant sort of where we are as we approach year 5 of the MS4 permit. We are, which is a DEP permit for stormwater of all cities and towns. We are, this is not Holliston specific. We are beginning to get to the end stage of the 5-year phase-in process where, this could lead to capital projects potentially, right? We replace culverts and do those types of things, sometimes on an emergency basis, sometimes on planning. And so some of those things may be coming up in the future. Where we are right now is staying in compliance, doing inventories as it comes to our culverts and our outfalls and those types of things. The other highlight of year 4 is going to be a phosphorus control plan. We are in the Charles River watershed, and they have a phosphorus issue that all the towns in that watershed now need to address in their MS4. So I have a quote here that goes up to $90,000. I believe last year's article was 92.3, and I'm looking at where we are with that balance before finalizing this number. But I've been in discussion with the consultant on that quote.
The annual report.
The annual report
Who's
is
that
part of this
provided? Yeah, who is that provided to?
DEP, and it's also available to the public.
Travis, real quick before we move on. I'm just drawing an absolute blank because every time I think of dams, I think it's such a complex issue. Where do we stand with dams? Do we need any funding or attention at the fall town meeting? I just don't want to forget about it, but
Yeah, so.
very quickly, briefly.
Yeah, another one that sort of works with ARPA to a certain extent, just as the wastewater conversation did. So we sat down with the group, we got the Concom involved, looked at what we got back from Leonard in terms of maintaining compliance with the state. The next thing that we're looking for is a cost benefit analysis. We're getting a quote. Mark Zedek, Ryan Clapp, myself are working with those consultants. What we'd like to look at is the cost benefit of the 3 options that we have for the 3 poor dams. And so at the moment, based on previous authorizations of town meetings, I believe that we will be able to engage with a cost benefit analysis to be done by one of those consultants with the funds that we currently have. If we were to go over, I would look at ARPA funding. We would bring that cost benefit analysis to have a community-wide conversation before potentially an article in May or beyond on actual action plan.
Thank you.
Road acceptance, I think we discussed quite a bit this evening, and that motion's been taken. The marijuana zoning, the planning board has a future public hearing on this. You have authorized them at your last meeting to put a zoning article on the fall town meeting, as you need to do by bylaw.
So we have the date for that, don't we? Just real
the
quick.
public.
Yeah, it's October 7th, Thursday, October 7th is the public hearing related to Article 16.
for delivery. And just for a quick primer on that, CCC essentially took a conversation to the 10-yard line and then punted on what delivery means. Is it retail? Is it not retail? We have prohibited retail in Holliston. And we have HCAs when it comes to cultivation and manufacturing and medical retail. And so the question essentially is delivery recreational retail, or is it its own category? And this will allow town meeting to weigh in on that. And the planning board will be the sponsor of that article, as you have allowed a zoning article on the town meeting. If it were annual, they would not need to go through that process.
So that's interesting. It's a zoning issue and it doesn't require any vote at the ballot for it.
This would not.
Interesting.
It's a question on a change that's been made by the CCC recently. It's potential that we would need to in the future. The planning board has worked with Kate Federoff, as I have on number 17, 18, and 19 here. So we're getting a lot of use out of Kate as it relates to cannabis in Holliston. But I can, sort of see if there is a ballot question coming in the future. So 17 and 18 and 19, again, as I mentioned for 7, 8, and 9, and I'd look to send to the finance committee. If you're comfortable with 17, 18, 19, I would look through the same. As it relates to our finance policies, really the guardrails that would go into the finance policy, I discussed with them, as I did with the select board, that the way that the article is set up will establish, the sort of widest parameters. The policy could always be more narrow if the select board and the finance committee choose, but the way that the stabilization fund is set up would be the general guardrail established by town meeting. The dedication of certain receipts and then the dedication of cannabis receipts to the stabilization fund is just a mechanism. Again, was done by Kate Federoff, so appreciate her support on that. There is one other potential article that she and I discussed, which I do not have on here, because I think 4 articles on cannabis is probably enough. And that would be if at some point in the future, the town chooses to change its stance on recreational retail, that we would then need to adopt a law to put, we would need to adopt a statute to put the excise revenue from recreational retail, which we currently don't receive because we don't have recreational retail, into the stabilization fund. At the moment, the way that these are set up, 17, 18, 19, would be to set up the fund, take the revenue that we do receive for cannabis, put it directly in the fund. At which point it could be later appropriated from town meeting for the purposes as established by the stabilization. Any issues with that?
No, none. I've heard this explained before, and it's a new conversation every time. The difference between 18 and 19 here. So dedication of certain receipts and then dedication of cannabis receipts. So 18 opens the door for 19. Is that kind of how it goes? We have to establish, well, first we have to establish 17 and then we have to do 18 and then we have to do 19.
Yes.
They're like steps on a ladder to get us to where we want to be. Okay. The language is, yeah, okay.
Okay, and then, so if people are comfortable with that language from Kate, I would pass that along for discussion as well. Lastly, the citizens petition that was received, I think I mentioned previously, the signatures have been certified by the clerk. At this point, I have a question on the legality of the citizens petition, so my recommendation would be for us to bring in Jay Tellerman to discuss it with you. Obviously, it's 9:24 tonight, so not tonight, but next week. As we continue to work through this warrant and finalize the document. If we put him on the agenda, I can reach out to the petitioner, let that individual know that we intend to have counsel here to discuss it with you, answer any questions on that. That would be my recommendation at this point.
Okay, and because the legality of it relates to the schools and their authority, we'll have representation from the schools at the meeting on the 27th.
I will coordinate with them if they'd like to be there, absolutely.
I think that's important. Yes, I would like to see this as an agenda item on the 27th.
Okay, I will coordinate with Jay or somebody from his office, but I think Jay probably getting into prep mode for us. I think we're his first town meeting, so might as well get him going. All right, so I will schedule Jay on the 27th as well to discuss that article. And this is what I have as of 4 p.m. today. So again, I have a few here that I think the numbers are refined, and I will send those to the finance committee if you're all comfortable with that.
So that looks like 7 articles that they perhaps hadn't had a chance to review, so they'll be able to review tomorrow night.
Yes.
I see the 7 through 9, and then I see 16 through 19.
Yes.
Okay, and any changes to the articles as written here would be based on new information that's been, will be presented over the next 2 weeks, and that's why we don't have a finalized presentation, because we're waiting on some new information.
Yes.
Okay.
For example, right, the quote that I have on stormwater management is for $90,000. I don't know that that's the number that I'm comfortable with. I'm gonna have to work with staff before we sort of finalize that.
I do have one other question for you. Your free cash assumption for any of the work that you're doing, it's the 5-year average of the past 5 years, right? Is that kind of where you're going for your assumption?
I would not base any decisions that you're currently making
Yeah.
on free cash assumptions. I'm sort of using some things. No, it's not necessarily based on that.
Okay, all right.
But again, based on last year, we got that certified on September 25th. I believe we're still on the same timeline, so we should have that by hopefully next week. And if not, we'll have to make some difficult decisions without all the information available to us. But I believe we're the first town meeting on our representative from DLS's calendar, which always goes in our favor. That means that we take priority. As I believe I told the story when I was in the town of Danvers, I would always ask the state to give me a number, and they'd always tell me I had to wait for people with October town meetings. And I'd always say, who in the heck has town meetings in October? And now I'm dealing with it.
Welcome.
So that's where we are. Any other questions on that? Otherwise, we'll have quite a bit to discuss next week as well.
We will. No, thank you for that overview. You all set then?
I am.
Okay, so we're gonna move on then to board business, starting with parade permit and then moving on to some appointments. Yes, please, the parade
We have
permit.
a parade permit from a group looking to organize an event on Saturday, October 2nd, 2021. This is the Cystic Fibrosis Cycle for Life. The event is scheduled to start at 7 a.m. at Fatima Shrine and will end at 4:30 p.m. At Fatima Shrine. On this particular matter, the Holliston Lieutenant George Larini approves of this, and I will make a motion to approve of the event permit for Cystic Fibrosis Cycle for Life at the time stated on October 2nd, 2021.
We have a motion, do we have a second?
I will second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
That carries. They did not, I don't believe they held it last year, certainly not in the form that it normally is, so it's nice to have this back in our town. A great event. All right, so we have some appointments. Erica Richardson and David Stevens as sworn weighers for Covent. There. I think I am looking at not quite the right, so hold on one second, Travis, let me pull up.
Yeah, sorry, I think the printed one was wrong. So under board business B, I have appointment of James Keith to the Historical Commission expiring in 2024.
Okay, so I
Which I have
will,
some information on.
okay, please present that information, Travis.
Okay, so there was, obviously this one was a little unusual. He's a employee of the town, was interested in joining the historical commission. That is a 7-member group. We currently have 3 members that do not have a quorum. We put out there twice now for any interested parties, and we still, even if he is appointed this evening, we'll still have open seats and be looking for any interested parties to join that group, which you can send that information if you're interested to the town administrator's office. But because he's a town employee, I just checked with council on where we are. So because the historical commission position is not compensated, i.e. there is not a stipend, James can join the group under 930 CMR 6.02 3A, which permits a paid municipal employee to be appointed to an uncompensated position without violating Mass General Law, Chapter 268, Section 20, so long as he completes and submits the attached disclosure, which James would do if you appoint him, which will be filed with the town clerk. So just got that from town council's staff who does these.
And in relation to that, he would need to abstain on any votes that he
Yes.
was and had known information from his town position.
This is correct.
All right, so I will entertain a motion to appoint James Keast to the Holliston Historical Commission for a term of, sorry, remind me what time?
Expiring in 2024.
All right, I make a motion to appoint James Keast to the Holliston Historical Commission until January of 2024. Make that motion, I need a second.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Abstain.
Thank you, that carries, okay. We're moving on then to the appointment now of Erica Richardson and David Stevens to the to be new sworn weighers for the Covanta Holliston Transfer Station. So with the term to expire on June 2022. I'm looking for a motion to appoint Erica Richardson and David Stevens.
So moved.
Second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, that carries. So Travis, if you have the posted agenda up there, just let me know if there's anything else I'm missing, because otherwise we're gonna move on to other business. All right, so other business, John.
Just one item on Celebrate Holliston. I encountered Kevin Conley, who had a little kiosk going into the Blair Square area looking for public support for the project. Ben, you're our liaison to the group. Kevin indicated that he was generating public support pursuant to some dialogue he had with the CPC committee. If there's something you can fill in the blanks with us for, because I think as a board, we conceptually approve of that project. Is there anything you want to advance to us on behalf of Kevin, the message he was making to generate support, how people can do that?
Sure.
So I don't want to put you on the spot, but this is the message you put out there.
No,
I think generally everyone kind of is.
No, and I think you know, Frank was looking and the CPC were looking for a little bit more information from the public. They were looking for you know, surveys, which we've certainly done in the past, that have approved, that have considered not only the development of Blair Square, but the particular some of the particular improvements that are being put forward in the proposal. And so people looking for any letters from interested parties. I mean, he certainly reached out to, you know, Kevin's reached out to, you know, Rail Trail Committee. He's reached out to schools. He's reached out to a variety of stakeholders that have interest in putting anything forward. And if anybody has any wants to chime in and wants to share their a letter of support, or wants any more and to answer any questions, they can certainly reach out to me specifically, or there's actually on their boards and committees, there's actually a Blair Square. I'm trying to see, I'm actually right there right now. But you can reach out to me, and I'll make sure that the folks at the Blair Square committee get any information about support. Just looking to make sure that we have an avalanche of information that says that people love the idea, and I think people do generally like the idea, including this board. But just wanting to reiterate that to the folks at the.
If I could make a recommendation, because it's not currently in the warrant for the upcoming town meeting, but it won't be given the status. I do recall that there was a projected budget. It was very preliminary. There was some work to be done to refine that. To the extent that the group is interested in doing some kind of public presentation at our upcoming town meeting to generate that kind of interest.
Sure.
Perhaps with updated numbers, I don't think it would hurt.
Yeah.
And that's pursuant to what the town moderator
Yeah,
allows, but
yeah.
there's no business before the town.
Right.
It would be for informational purposes.
Yeah, they just I apologize if I hadn't brought it forward before, but the Blair Square committee actually voted to put off the proposal until May, because there was some, it was a tight timeline, and they wanted to get some things done as quickly to make sure that things were they had their ducks in a row, and they weren't trying to like rush things overly and have some potential gaps.
John, what did Kevin have down there at Blair Square? He was in Blair Square with the presentation, right? Did he have I didn't get to stop him.
Rendering, same rendering. we've seen.
Okay,
It
so
was just
and-
stopping people, explaining
Right,
to them
right.
what the project was and so forth, talking to some of the stakeholders. Travis was at the table with his kids at the time, Dan Alford was there, myself.
So Peter, I talked to
He was
Peter.
just talking to people and trying to, right at the tip of Blair Square.
I bring it up because Chief, we've had 3 town meetings where there's been nobody gathering for any purpose. They've been directed in, so this idea of having something in the lobby for people to look at is something we maybe have slightly forgotten about. So, yeah, I would absolutely invite Kevin if he could put it
I'll
up
talk
on an easel to have.
I'll talk to
people
him and
come
see if he's
look.
interested and
Yeah.
put that forward.
Okay, great. Anything else, John?
No, thank you.
Okay, Ben?
The only thing I'll bring up is that the comprehensive long-range planning committee, which is now called Envisioning Future Holliston, will be meeting this Wednesday at 7:30 p.m. We're gonna have a couple things on the agenda. It's posted on the website, the town's website, if people wanna join in. I think I have to run the beginning of the meeting, because Stacy, it's a school,
Yeah.
back to school night, and then the vice chair
What
is
is this?
unavailable. So if people want to join in, I think it's an exciting opportunity for the town to start looking forward to try to put some new ideas out there. But for right now, it's sort of the information gathering stage, and probably pick up steam pretty quickly after just collecting enough people to get a quorum. Sometimes it can be a little challenging when you have a 17-member meeting.
I remember listening into the very first meeting. The intention is to, if there's going to be a report to town meeting, it would probably be in May. The recommendations,
no,
there's nothing that was
There's
expected.
absolutely not, no, there's not, we're not prepared for that yet.
Okay. All right, I have two. I wanted to just let you guys, I probably should have done it under public comment. I want to let you know I attended September's department head meeting. Well attended, and Travis does a really nice job running a tight agenda. Good job. The department head meeting.
Oh.
So I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to attend and listen in, and no one had any questions for me, but it was still great to see everybody in their workspace doing their thing. It's a great group of people we have working in town hall in our departments. And then John, I had a question for you. I remember the discussion when we got back the survey on 260 Woodland.
Yes,
The pump track
yes.
was one of the top contenders based on the feedback
Yes.
that we received. I believe you were going to take it to Parks, and they were.
It-
Did they have has that been an agenda item on any of their meetings?
Well, it was, I spoke with them
Right.
probably a month ago,
Okay.
and Sean Lively gave a lot of feedback. I thought I mentioned this to the board, but I'll reiterate. One of the main sponsors of the pump track and Sean had a conversation about what specifically they were looking to do with a pump track and how it can figure into the park's larger profile of property. Sean had asked the sponsor to, not the sponsor, but the gentleman who's a big advocate for it, to look at some alternative elements of the plan. And Sean was active within the parks and his group to see if they could bring that particular element into the parks environment. I have not followed up with Shaw since then to find out how far they've progressed.
Okay,
And again, the purpose of my meeting with them, and it was a public meeting, was to discuss perhaps moving that kind of an element within the parks and recreation system. And just personally, I think that's a better complementary fit for that kind of an item. Shaw was, in addition, exploring public-private options similar to Heiser up on Marshall Street and sponsorships. He actually took the ball and ran with it. I mean, he was very active on this. So allow me, Tina, to your point, I'll find out how much farther down the road they've gotten with respect to that project, and whether or not it's a right fit for parks, or if we need to bring it back into the element of the Woodland Street piece that we put the survey up for.
we were
Okay?
never expecting that to be anything for October town meeting, but as we will quickly pivot and start to look at May, I'm just curious how we're going to approach 260 Woodland Street.
I
If
think
in
whatever
time
it
for
is,
May or what?
I think whatever it becomes, in my humble opinion, we ought to make application CPC. It's going to be a recreational thing, more likely. And I think would be a better fit there, but.
That is all I have. All right, so hearing no other business for the board tonight, I will entertain a motion to adjourn at 9:40.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Good night, Holliston. We'll see you next week.